Hey there, tonight we're diving into the gritty world of Victorian child labour, where the truth is, a day off was just a rumour whispered in soot-filled alleys. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So, you found yourself in the thick of the 19th century, where the air is filled with the clatter of machines and the occasional soot-laden cough. Welcome to the Industrial Revolution, my friend, a time when Britain decided to trade in pastoral tranquility for a cacophony of steam engines and factory whistles. Sounds thrilling, right? Well, not if you're a pint-sized labourer pressed into service before you've even outgrown your favourite toy. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, let's talk about why this era was such a hotbed for child labour. You see, the Industrial Revolution was like a massive economic engine that needed all the fuel it could get to keep chugging along. And by fuel, I mean cheap labour. Enter the factory owners, who saw children not as the next generation of bright minds, but as bite-sized workers who could be paid a pittance. Why pay for a full-grown adult when you could pay a child a fraction of the cost, sometimes as little as 10% of an adult's wage? Bargain basement prices for human labour, if you will. These kids were shoved into a variety of industries, but the textile factories and coal mines were the real MVPs of child exploitation. In textile factories, you might find yourself working with machinery that was as hungry for fingers as it was for cotton. Kids as young as 5 were expected to get cozy with these hulking machines, often working 12-hour days. Can you imagine doing anything for 12 hours straight at that age, other than maybe playing with a particularly intriguing stick? Then there's the coal mines. Ah, coal, the black gold of the Industrial Revolution. It powered everything, from locomotives to steamships, and it needed to be dug out of the ground by someone small enough to fit into the narrowest of seams. Who better than children, whose diminutive size was suddenly an asset rather than a liability? The mines were dark, damp, and dangerous, a trifecta of misery. And yet, it was all part of the day's work for these young labourers. So why were kids put to work in such miserable conditions, you ask? Let's put on our economic theory hat for a moment. In the 1800s, the population was booming, and with more mouths to feed, families were desperate for any source of income. Child labour wasn't just tolerated, it was expected. A family's survival often depended on every member pulling their weight, no matter how small their hands were. And factory owners were more than happy to capitalize on this desperation. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. These jobs were brutal. In the textile mills, the air was thick with cotton dust, which was fantastic for developing a nice, chronic cough. Not to mention the constant risk of injury from the machines themselves. One slip, and you might lose a finger or worse. Workers often faced a punishing schedule. 6 days a week, sunrise to sunset, with just enough pay to keep you in gruel and rags. In coal mines, the conditions were even more dire. Imagine spending your day in a narrow, pitch-black tunnel, armed with nothing but a candle and a pickaxe. You'd crawl through these claustrophobic spaces, hauling coal for hours on end. If you were lucky, you'd only come out with a sore back and blackened lungs. If not, well, cave-ins and explosions were an ever-present danger. The wages these kids earned were pitiful, often a mere shilling or two a week. To put that in perspective, a shilling might buy you a loaf of bread and some cheese if you were frugal. But hey, at least you weren't starving, right? The sad irony is that these children were working to survive, yet their work was slowly chipping away at their health and their futures. And what about the adults in all this? Surely they couldn't stand idly by while their kids were subjected to such conditions. Well, think again. In many cases, parents had little choice but to send their children to work, as their meagre wages alone weren't enough to make ends meet. It was a vicious cycle, driven by poverty and industrial demand, with the factory owners laughing all the way to the bank. So, there you have it. The Industrial Revolution wasn't just a time of great technological advancement. It was also a period of great human cost. And while we might look back on it with a sense of wonder and progress, it's important to remember the small hands that turned the cogs and stoked the fires. In this story, the children weren't just passive participants. They were essential cogs in the industrial machine, even as the very machine was grinding them down. Fast forward to the hum of the Industrial Revolution, and you're smack dab in the middle of a scene that could make even a Dickens novel look like a children's bedtime story. We're talking about a time when health and safety was as foreign a concept as Wi-Fi. The factories were not just workplaces. They were gauntlets of spinning wheels and gnashing gears, each ready to take a piece of you if you dared to blink. Imagine this. 1 minute you're a kid, daydreaming about playing in the fields, and the next, you're part of a living nightmare. Your small hands expected to navigate the labyrinth of lethal machinery for hours on end. Let's get specific. Picture a cotton mill in Manchester, circa 1840. The air, saturated with cotton dust, a fine mist that turned lungs into a breeding ground for diseases. Cotton mills were notorious for respiratory illnesses, and mill fever was no urban legend. Children coughed their way through shifts that could last 12 to 14 hours, often leaving with a persistent hack that followed them into adulthood, if they made it that far. It's estimated that around 40% of mill workers suffered from lung disease, a grim testament to their daily grind. And the machines, they were less about precision and more about appetite. Fingers, hands, even entire limbs were just one slip away from becoming a gruesome sacrifice to the industrial beast. In a particularly chilling report from 1833, factory inspectors noted that injuries were so common, they'd stopped shocking anyone. For some factories, losing a few fingers was just a part of the process, like a tax write-off. Now, let's take a detour underground, where the coal mines lurked with their own brand of horror. Mining wasn't just about the black rocks. It was about navigating a subterranean maze that seemed custom-designed for disaster. Kids were often tasked with roles like trappers, who opened and closed ventilation doors in near-pitch darkness. Their only companion, a flickering candle. The risk of cave-ins was constant, and the air was a cocktail of coal dust and methane. Ever heard of black lung? It was as common as it was lethal. The irony, these kids were working to keep the industrial fires burning, all while their own lungs turned into kindling. Statistics, how about this? In 1842, a report revealed that 1/3 of the workforce in British coal mines was under 18, with some as young as 5. Let that sink in. A 5-year-old handling a pickaxe in a dark, dangerous mine. It's enough to make you question the definition of childhood during this era. So why was everyone so chill about this child endangerment? Well, the Victorian era had a peculiar way of turning a blind eye when it suited the economic agenda. The prevailing attitude was that work was character building, a notion that conveniently ignored the reality of mangled limbs and chronic illness. Factory owners, ever the paragons of virtue, argued that employing children was a necessary evil to keep the economy afloat. And as for legal protections, they were as non-existent as a day off. The 1833 Factory Act was one of the first steps towards reform, but it was more of a feeble suggestion than a law with teeth. It limited work hours for children aged 9–13 to a mere 48 hours a week. Progress, right. This era's indifference wasn't just confined to the factories and mines. It was systemic, woven into the very fabric of Victorian society. Child welfare was a novel concept, something to be debated by those who had the luxury of worrying about more than just survival. The reality was brutal. In a world where every extra penny could mean the difference between bread or hunger, the well-being of children was often a secondary concern. Yet, amidst this grim tableau, there were whispers of change. Reformists and activists slowly began to question the morality of an economy built on the backs of children. The reality was too stark to ignore forever, and public consciousness was beginning to stir. The seeds of reform were being planted, but it would take years, and countless more stories of suffering, before any real change took root. So, as the 19th century chugged along, the gears of industry ground on, fueled by the sweat and sacrifice of its youngest workers. It's a chapter of history that forces you to confront the uncomfortable truths behind progress. For every steam engine that puffed triumphantly into the future, there was a child left coughing in its wake. And while we might look back and marvel at the era's innovations, it's crucial to remember the human cost that came with every turn of the wheel. This story is far from over, and as we dive deeper, we'll uncover more about the lives and struggles of those who bore the brunt of industrial ambition. Stay tuned, because the plot is just beginning to thicken. So let's keep this Victorian saga rolling, shall we? Picture a society where child labour was as commonplace as top hats and penny farthings. The Victorians had a peculiar knack for seeing the world through rose-tinted monocles, especially when it came to the character-building virtues of child labour. In their collective mind, sending kids off to work was less about exploitation and more about instilling a good, old-fashioned work ethic. After all, who needs a childhood when you can be a contributing member of society before you've even lost your baby teeth? The societal perceptions of child labour were deeply entangled with the iron grip of poverty. For many Victorian families, poverty wasn't just an inconvenience. It was the grim reality that dictated every aspect of life, from the cradle to an all-too-early grave. The Industrial Revolution, while hailed for its technological marvels, didn't exactly roll out the red carpet for the lower classes. It was more like a revolving door of poverty, where one generation's hardships seamlessly handed off to the next. Enter the workhouses, the Victorian equivalent of a last-ditch safety net. Except, instead of catching you gently, these institutions were more likely to chew you up and spit you out. The Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834 was supposed to streamline the welfare system, but it did so with all the grace of a steam engine rolling over a cobblestone street. The Act's solution to poverty was to make conditions in the workhouses so abysmal that even the desperate would think twice before seeking refuge. The logic: if you're suffering less than you would in a workhouse, maybe you'll be motivated to find gainful employment. Because, clearly, the only thing standing between a pauper and a prosperous life was a lack of motivation, right? Workhouses were designed to be self-sufficient mini-industrial complexes, complete with their own brand of Victorian charm. Dormitories reminiscent of prison cells and meals that made gruel seem like haute cuisine. Families who sought refuge here were often separated, because emotional support might distract you from your duties. Children were set to work in whatever capacity might be useful, which was just a polite way of saying profitable for the workhouse. It was a system that seemed to forget these were human beings, not just cogs in the economic machine. Now, let's talk education, or the distinct lack thereof. In an era when school was a luxury, many kids were lucky if they could spell their own names before being thrust into the workforce. The few who did have access to education often found it ended abruptly, replaced by the relentless march of factory life. In 1851, it was estimated that only about a third of children between the ages of 5 and 14 attended school. The rest, well, they were too busy making ends meet, quite literally, in the case of those working in textile mills. The Victorian family, often romanticized as a bastion of love and support, was more frequently a unit of economic survival. Forget the cozy fireside scenes depicted in sepia-toned photographs. The reality was a far cry from this idealized vision. Families were often large, not because Victorian parents couldn't keep their hands to themselves, but because more kids meant more potential earners. It was a numbers game where every additional child was another chance at financial stability, or at least a buffer against total destitution. Primary accounts from the era paint a stark picture. Take, for instance, the words of one young worker, John Fielden, who wrote about his experiences in a cotton mill. "We worked from 6 in the morning until 8 at night, with only 1 hour allowed for meals. Our wages were barely sufficient to procure us food." Not exactly the stuff of heartwarming family tales, is it? And while we're on the topic of busting myths, let's not forget the role of societal attitudes in perpetuating this cycle. To the upper echelons of Victorian society, child labour was a non-issue. After all, their offspring was safely tucked away in boarding schools, not labouring in the bowels of a coal mine. It was a classic case of out of sight, out of mind, with a dash of moral superiority thrown in for good measure. The wealthy often viewed poverty as a moral failing, not a systemic issue, a mindset that conveniently absolved them of any responsibility for the plight of the lower classes. Yet, amidst this bleak landscape, there were glimmers of change. Reformers like Lord Ashley, the 7th Earl of Shaftesbury, began to challenge the status quo, pushing for legislation that would eventually lead to the Factory Acts, a series of laws aimed at improving conditions for industrial workers. But these reforms were slow to take hold, and their impact often felt like a drop in the proverbial ocean at a time when the tide of industrial ambition still loomed large. So, as we delve deeper into this era, we find a society grappling with its own contradictions. The advancements of the Industrial Revolution were undeniable, but they came at a cost that was all too often borne by the youngest and most vulnerable. As we continue to untangle the threads of this complicated tapestry, we'll explore how the very foundations of Victorian society were built on the backs of those who had the least to give. Stay tuned, because there's plenty more to uncover in this tale of grit, grind, and grim determination. And so, amidst the murky world of coal dust and cotton lint, a few brave souls dared to ask, isn't it time we stopped treating children like miniature adults? Enter the Reformers, Victorian society's version of the Avengers, but with more cravats and fewer superpowers. These were the people who looked at the industrial landscape, saw the young lives being chewed up and spat out, and decided it was high time for a change. They were the ones who dared to imagine a world where kids could be kids, not just pint-sized labourers. Leading the charge was the indefatigable Lord Ashley, better known as the 7th Earl of Shaftesbury. Now, here was a man who was as relentless as a factory foreman, but with a heart as big as a steam engine. He spearheaded the movement for factory reform, convinced that turning a blind eye to child labour was not only morally bankrupt, but downright barbaric. Ashley was the driving force behind the 10 Hours Act of 1847, which sought to limit the workday for women and children in textile mills to, you guessed it, 10 hours. 10 hours might still sound grueling, but compared to the 12 to 14-hour days previously endured, it was practically a half-day. Alongside Ashley was Richard Osler, a man whose fierce advocacy earned him the nickname, the Factory King. Osler was no stranger to controversy, famously dubbing the factories the devil's workshops. He campaigned tirelessly for better working conditions, using his pen as a weapon and public opinion as his battlefield. His writings and speeches were instrumental in galvanizing the public, revealing the ugly truths behind the pretty facade of industrial progress. Osler knew how to stir the pot, and his fiery rhetoric was a wake-up call to a society that preferred to stay snuggled under the duvet of ignorance. But let's not forget the legislation itself. The Factory Acts, beginning with the 1833 Act, were the stepping stones toward a more humane working environment. Sure, the 1833 Act was more of a tentative toe dip into the waters of reform, but it was a start. It applied only to textile factories and set the minimum working age at 9, with a paltry 8-hour day for children aged 9 to 13. Not exactly a revolutionary change, but it was the legislative equivalent of planting a flag and saying, we're not okay with this. And then there was the Mines Act of 1842, which finally put an end to the horror of women and children working underground. The act was spurred on by the shocking revelations of the Children's Employment Commission report, which detailed the appalling conditions in the mines with a level of detail that left the public reeling. When it came to public reaction, the Mines Act of 1842 was like dropping a match in a room full of dynamite. It was one thing to know theoretically that children were labouring in the mines, but quite another to read accounts of girls dragging coal carts through tunnels in the dark. Yet, despite these legislative victories, progress was slower than a horse-drawn carriage on cobblestones. Why? Because industry was about as cooperative as a stubborn mule, kicking and braying all the way to the reform table. Factory owners argued that limiting child labor would cripple the economy, lead to mass unemployment, and horror of horrors, force them to hire more expensive adult labor. They had a point, if your point is that profit margins are the only thing that matters. But for the reformers, the human cost of inaction was far greater. Public opinion was a mixed bag. On one hand, there was a growing awareness and outrage over the conditions children faced. On the other, there was the ever-persistent belief that work was good for the soul, even if it was slowly killing the body. It was a balancing act between economic necessity and moral responsibility, and not everyone was convinced that the scales should tip in favor of reform. But reformers weren't about to let a little resistance stop them. They continued to push, prod, and provoke until societal attitudes began to shift. The movement for compulsory education gained momentum, fueled by the recognition that education was the key to breaking the cycle of poverty. The Elementary Education Act of 1870 was a landmark moment, establishing the framework for compulsory schooling and signaling a shift in priorities, from survival to education. So, as the 19th century crept toward its close, the seeds of change were finally beginning to take root. Child labor, once seen as an unfortunate but necessary evil, was increasingly viewed as a blight on society. The reformers had managed to pry open the eyes of a nation, revealing the harsh realities behind the industrial facade. But the story was far from over. The wheels of reform were turning, albeit slowly, and the road ahead was still fraught with challenges. In the end, the push for reform was a testament to the power of perseverance and the belief that a better world was possible. It was a reminder that progress often comes in fits and starts, with each small victory paving the way for greater change. And while the battle for the rights of child workers was just one chapter in the broader story of social reform, it was a crucial one, proof that even the smallest voices can spark the loudest revolutions. So stay tuned, because the saga of Victorian child labor is far from over. There are more twists and turns to navigate, more stories to uncover, and more lessons to be learned from this dark but fascinating period in history. As we continue to peel back the layers of the past, we'll see how these early reforms laid the groundwork for a future where children could finally be children, and not just cogs in the industrial machine. So, with the reformers having laid the groundwork, you might think the Victorian era wrapped up child labor like a Dickensian soap opera, complete with a neat little bow. But hold your horses, or should I say, your steam engines. The truth is, the fight against child labor was a marathon, not a sprint, and the track was littered with obstacles. However, the seeds sown by the likes of Lord Ashley and Richard Osler did eventually blossom into something more than just legal jargon on aging parchment. As we wheeled into the 20th century, the impact of these reforms began to ripple through society. The Factory Acts and the Mines Act weren't just footnotes in history. They were stepping stones toward a more humane labor landscape. By the early 1900s, the British workforce was looking a bit more like a reasonably healthy adult human workforce, and less like the cast of Oliver Twist. The 1901 Factory and Workshop Act raised the minimum working age to 12, and by 1918, compulsory education had been extended to all children up to 14. So kids could finally trade in their pickaxes and spindles for pencils and textbooks, at least in theory. These changes didn't just benefit the children, they also had profound effects on society and the economy. With more kids in school rather than the coal mine, literacy rates began to climb like a hot air balloon on a clear day. This newfound emphasis on education helped create a more skilled workforce, setting the stage for Britain's transition from an industrial powerhouse to a modern economy. It's like swapping out a clunky Victorian steam engine for a sleek automobile. Suddenly, the world's your oyster, and you've got the skills to shuck it. But let's not get too misty-eyed. While Britain was slowly getting its act together, the echoes of Victorian child labor were reverberating across the globe. and not in a good way. Fast forward to today, and you'll find that child labor is still alive and kicking, just wearing a different set of clothes. The International Labour Organization estimates that, as of 2020, around 160 million children worldwide are engaged in child labor. That's roughly 1 in 10 kids, or about the population of Russia, all working when they should be playing tag or mastering the art of building a pillow fort. The industries have changed. Think agriculture, manufacturing, and informal sectors. But the exploitation remains eerily familiar. The same economic pressures that once turned British kids into factory fodder now drive children in developing countries into fields and sweatshops. And while the specifics differ, the underlying themes are all too recognizable. Poverty, lack of access to education, and the relentless pursuit of cheap labor. It's like history repeating itself, only this time with a globalized twist. This brings us to the modern-day labor laws that owe their existence to those early Victorian reforms. The very concept of a work-life balance is something we can thank the labor reformers for, even if it's often more of a work-work balance these days. Minimum wage laws, child labor prohibitions, and workplace safety regulations all have their roots in the battles fought by our reformist friends with the fancy titles and the even fancier waistcoats. And yet, while we've come a long way, there's still a winding road ahead. The global economy is like a tricky puzzle, and child labor is one of those pieces that stubbornly refuses to fit neatly into place. It's a stark reminder that vigilance against exploitation must be as ceaseless as a Victorian factory's clanging machinery. We may no longer have soot-stained children hauling coal through the bowels of England, but the fight against child labor is far from over. So, what's the takeaway here, besides the fact that children should really be more concerned with crayons than coal? It's that progress is never a straight line, and history has a habit of echoing louder than a factory whistle. The legacy of Victorian child labor reform is a testament to human resilience and the belief that we can always do better. As we look back on this chapter of history, let's carry forward its lessons and remember that, in the grand scheme of things, safeguarding the innocence of childhood is as essential now as it was back in the days of top hats and steam engines. In the end, let's not forget that change often starts with a single voice, a lone figure standing in the shadows of the industrial giants, daring to ask, "Isn't there a better way?" As we peer into the past, it's clear that the smallest voices can ignite the biggest revolutions. So here's to progress, to the reformers who dared to dream, and to a future where every child can truly be just that, a child. Keep asking questions, keep pushing boundaries, and remember, history may echo, but it doesn't have to repeat. You wake up to the sound of roosters crowing and the soft chatter of the marketplace setting up for another day. Welcome to ancient Athens, where democracy is the buzzword, but not everyone gets a seat at the table, or even a table at all. As a citizen, you stretch on your wooden bed, maybe a little straw for comfort, in a modest home. Meanwhile, your slave is already up, ensuring the day runs smoothly. Ah, the joys of citizenship come with their perks, don't they? Your home is a lesson in simplicity. We're talking about a 2-story affair, if you're among the luckier citizens. The ground floor is where all the action happens, cooking, socializing, and even some business dealings. Upstairs, you'll find the sleeping quarters. No grand palaces here, just practicality and a touch of austerity. You won't find paint or frescoes screaming wealth on these walls, just the quiet, practical coolness of whitewashed surfaces. Meanwhile, the slaves, yep, they're tucked away in the most functional corners of the house, sometimes even sharing space with the livestock. Talk about a cozy arrangement. Time for morning hygiene, and sure, it's not exactly a spa day. You've got your clay basin filled with water, and you're all set. Soap is unheard of. Olive oil and astrigil are the tools of choice. It's like a prehistoric spa treatment, scraping off the day before, literally. The water isn't exactly sparkling clean, but hey, it's good enough to keep the ancient germs at bay. Slaves get no such luxuries, though. They're lucky if they get a quick rinse before diving into their chores. Let's talk breakfast. As a citizen, you might enjoy a modest meal of bread, barley bread, to be precise. It's the Athenian staple. You'll dunk it in a bit of olive oil if you're feeling fancy. Cost-wise, barley is like the ancient equivalent of ramen noodles, a cheap, filling option. A bushel of barley could set you back about a drachma, roughly the daily wage of a skilled labourer. Olive oil, on the other hand, is a bit of a luxury, often imported from far-off lands like Crete. For a slave, breakfast is less of an affair and more of a necessity. A chunk of that same barley bread, maybe with a hint of something else if their master is feeling generous. Now, before you start romanticizing this breakfast as a quaint Mediterranean diet, remember, it's more about survival than savoring. The Athenian citizen might discuss politics over their morning meal, but the slaves have no voice in this democracy. Sure, Athens is the cradle of democracy, but if you're a woman, a slave, or not from around here, you're sitting in the bleachers, not the arena. Speaking of democracy, it's time to pop that idealistic bubble. Only about 30,000 to 60,000 men in Athens have full citizenship privileges. Out of a population of roughly 250,000, that's less than a quarter enjoying the democratic dream. Women, foreigners, and slaves. They're on the outside looking in. So while Pericles and his buddies are busy shaping the polis, the rest are contributing in other, less recognized ways. Building, cooking, serving, and yes, even fighting. As you sip on your watered-down wine, because straight-up wine is just too much for breakfast, consider the economic cogs turning in the city. The agora bustles with life, a hub of trade. Olive oil isn't just breakfast garnish. It's liquid gold. Athenian coins make their rounds, stamped with the owl of Athene, a currency as much about politics as economics. Trading partners from across the Aegean bring their goods, and it's here that the power of Athens truly shows. The economy isn't just about the clink of coin, it's the clash of cultures, ideas, and politics. So, as you prepare to step out into the morning sun, remember this. Athens is a city of contrasts. Citizens and slaves, wealth and austerity, freedom and subjugation. It's all here, woven into the fabric of daily life. As you pull on your himation and head out, take a moment to appreciate the complexity of your world. You're living in a society that's both the foundation and contradiction of modern democracy, where the ideal and the real are in constant dialogue. Buckle up, because your day in ancient Greece is just getting started. As you step into the agora, the heart of Athenian life, get ready for a sensory overload. The agora is not just a marketplace. It's a vibrant, chaotic symphony where commerce and conversation go hand in hand. Imagine the ancient equivalent of Wall Street, a farmer's market, and a social media feed all rolled into one. The cacophony of haggling merchants, the clink of Athenian drachmas, the smell of fresh fish mingling with the scent of olive oil and herbs. It's all part of the daily hustle. Now, let's talk citizenship, the supposed golden ticket in this democratic experiment. But before you get starry-eyed about the ideal Greek citizen, remember this. Athens wasn't exactly handing out citizenship like free samples. Women, slaves, and metics, foreigners living in Athens, were as likely to become citizens as a snowball is to survive in the Athenian sun. Approximately only 10% of Athens' population were full citizens. That's right, the ultimate club with a velvet rope even Studio 54 would envy. To be a citizen, you needed to be male, born of citizen parents, and have completed military training. It's a bit like trying to join an exclusive gym, but with more armor and less lycra. The agora is where this exclusivity plays out in full force. Citizens stroll through, discussing politics and philosophy, maybe stopping to pick up a new chiton or debate the latest play by Sophocles. Meanwhile, slaves and metics do the heavy lifting, literally. Slaves are buying and selling goods for their masters, their labor the backbone of the Athenian economy. They're the invisible hands turning the gears of this so-called democracy. Metics, on the other hand, are often traders and artisans, fueling commerce, but forever outside the political circle. They can't vote or own land, but their skills and taxes are indispensable to the city. Talk about taxation without representation. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of the economy. Athenian currency, the drachma, is the lifeblood of trade. Stamped with the owl of Athene, each coin is a little disc of political propaganda. A skilled labourer might earn a drachma a day, which could buy you a bushel of barley or a decent bottle of wine. If you were splurging, you might pick up a pair of sandals for about 3 drachmas, assuming you weren't into the whole barefoot philosopher vibe. Trade is the agora's heartbeat. Olive oil, the liquid gold of the Mediterranean, is a staple. It's not just for cooking, it's used in lamps, cosmetics, and religious rituals. The Athenian economy thrives on its export, along with wine and pottery. These goods travel across the Aegean and beyond, making Athens a hub of international commerce. In return, Athens imports goods like grain, essential to feed its population, much like how we rely on international trade for our morning coffee fix. Here's where the myth-busting gets juicy. While Athens prides itself on being a democracy, it's a democracy with asterisks. Plato famously criticized it as a system where citizens could be swayed by persuasive rhetoric rather than sound policy. Sound familiar. The assembly, the city's democratic forum, gathers at the Pnyx, where every citizen has the right to speak. But with thousands of citizens, only the most vocal or influential actually get heard. It's like trying to get a word in during a heated family dinner. Good luck. Slaves, though integral to the economy, have no such voice. They range from household servants to skilled workers, and some even manage businesses for their masters. Yet their status remains unchanged. Property, not people. The irony. Many slaves were more educated than their owners, especially those from captured regions known for their intellectual prowess. Imagine being Aristotle's tutor, and yet having fewer rights than a houseplant. As you navigate the agora, remember the social hierarchy is as rigid as the columns of the Parthenon. Citizens enjoy privileges that come with responsibilities, military service, political participation, and the expectation to contribute to public life. But it's the slaves and metics who grease the wheels of this societal machine. They build, craft, and maintain the very structures that house Athenian democracy. In many ways, they are the unsung architects of the city's prosperity. The agora is more than a marketplace. It's the stage where Athens' contradictions play out. It's a place where the ideals of democracy clash with the realities of exclusion, where the currency of ideas and goods flow side by side. As you weave through the crowds, remember that this bustling square is both the heart of Athenian life and a testament to its complexities. Here, the lines between citizen and non-citizen blur in the shared pursuit of prosperity, each playing their part in the grand narrative of ancient Greece. So, as you take in the sights and sounds, ponder the paradox that is Athens, a city built on the foundations of freedom and equality, yet mired in inequality and exclusion. It's a reminder that the more things change, the more they stay the same. And with that, your day in ancient Greece continues, with more myths to bust and realities to uncover. Stay tuned, because the agora is just the beginning. Athenian life is a tapestry of stories waiting to be unraveled. As you step away from the bustling agora, the clamour of commerce fading into the background, let's take a little detour into the cerebral world of Athens, the land of education and culture. Now, before you start picturing toga-clad philosophers lounging around in a cerebral utopia, let's set the record straight. Ancient Athens might have been the intellectual engine of its time, but it wasn't exactly a free-for-all knowledge buffet. Access to this world was as restricted as an ancient VIP club. No membership, no entry. Education in Athens was like the Wi-Fi signal in a coffee shop. Strong if you're close to the source, but non-existent for those on the fringes. If you were an Athenian citizen, especially a male, congratulations. You were handed the keys to the kingdom of knowledge, assuming your family could afford the tuition, of course. Education wasn't free. It was a commodity, and like all good commodities, it came with a price tag. Families shelled out roughly 12 drachmas per year for a basic education. That's about 2 weeks' wages for a skilled labourer, not exactly pocket change. So what did this education buy you? Well, young Athenian boys were groomed from the tender age of 7 to become the thinkers, orators, and leaders of tomorrow. They learned the essentials: reading, writing, and arithmetic, but that was just the appetizer. The real meat and potatoes of an Athenian education were rhetoric and philosophy. Yes, the art of persuasion and the love of wisdom were the cornerstones of their curriculum. After all, in a democracy where your voice mattered, if you were the right kind of citizen, being able to argue your point was as crucial as having a solid voting strategy. Now, if you're a woman or a slave, your educational opportunities were as limited as a snowball's chance in the Athenian sun. Women might learn the basics of household management, but philosophy and rhetoric, forget it. Their classroom was the home, their curriculum was domestic duty. For slaves, education was a luxury they couldn't even dream of. Sure, some slaves, captured from regions with strong educational traditions, might possess knowledge surpassing that of their masters, but their status as property shackled them to ignorance in the eyes of society. Speaking of rhetoric and philosophy, let's dive into the intellectual heart of Athens. This city is like the Silicon Valley of ancient thought, where names like Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle aren't just historical footnotes. They're the rock stars of reason. These guys were the original influencers, shaping thought not with hashtags, but with dialogues and debates. Plato's Academy, one of the earliest institutions of higher learning, wasn't a brick-and-mortar school, but rather a gathering of minds, a think tank of the ancient world. Admission wasn't a matter of tuition, but of intellect and reputation. But here's a myth worth busting: the idea that all Athenian citizens were lounging around discussing metaphysics and the meaning of life. In reality, only a select few dove deep into philosophical waters. Most citizens were too busy keeping the wheels of daily life turning, running businesses, farming, or serving in the military. Philosophy was more a hobby for the affluent than a daily staple. It's like expecting everyone today to be fluent in quantum physics while juggling a full-time job. Yet, for those who could afford the luxury of thought, philosophy was more than just idle speculation. It was a tool for navigating the complexities of life, a guide for personal conduct, and a means of participating in the civic life of the polis. The emphasis on rhetoric and debate wasn't just about winning arguments. It was about crafting a society where ideas mattered. In the tumultuous assembly of Athens, your ability to sway opinion could turn the tide of public policy. As we peel back the layers of this intellectual society, it's crucial to remember that enlightenment was, ironically, not universally accessible. The intellectual circles of Athens were exclusive by design, reserved for those who had the means and the connections. It's a reminder that knowledge has always been power, and in ancient Athens, that power was carefully guarded by those fortunate enough to wield it. So as you munch on your afternoon snack, consider this. The democratic ideals of Athens were built on a foundation of inequality. The city that celebrated the power of the mind simultaneously suppressed the voices of many. The myth of universal enlightenment is just that, a myth. In reality, the pursuit of knowledge was a privilege, not a right, highlighting the paradox of a society that celebrated freedom while chaining so many to ignorance. But don't let that bummer of a reality check bring you down. Instead, let it fuel your curiosity as we continue to unravel the complexities of ancient Athens. This city of contradictions has more stories to tell, more myths to debunk, and more layers to explore. And who knows, maybe in the process, we'll learn a thing or two about the modern world along the way. Stay tuned. While you're digesting the paradoxes of Athenian enlightenment, let's swivel back to the gritty reality of our ancient Greek soap opera, the labor economy. In the afternoon light, Athens reveals its less glamorous but oh-so-essential backbone, slavery. Now, before you picture a quaint ancient version of Downton Abbey with benevolent masters and doting servants, let's rip that myth to shreds. The truth is, the Athenian economy ran on an engine of human misery, and it wasn't exactly a secret. To start, let's get some numbers on the table. Out of Athens' estimated 250,000 inhabitants, nearly a third were slaves. That's right, Around 80,000 individuals had their lives dictated by someone else's whims. Slaves were the invisible hands that kept Athens ticking, an economy that boasted intellectual brilliance but relied heavily on the sweat and toil of the subjugated. In terms of jobs, slaves were the Swiss army knives of the ancient world. Need a potter, a household servant, a silver miner. There's a slave for that. The types of work varied wildly, but none of it was optional. Household slaves might cook, clean, or even educate their master's children. Skilled slaves could be craftsmen or artisans, contributing directly to Athens' famed pottery and sculpture. But let's not sugarcoat it. No matter how skilled, they were still property. One of the grimmest gigs, mining. If you were a slave in the silver mines of Laurian, well, tough luck. Imagine spending your days in dark, cramped tunnels, breathing in dust and fearing cave-ins, all to extract the silver that fueled Athens' economy and minted its coins. The life expectancy in these mines was tragically brief, a few months at best, a stark reminder that for slaves, Athens' prosperity came at a horrific cost. Now let's talk housing, or should I say lack thereof. Slave quarters were less about comfort and more about utility. In wealthier homes, slaves slept on mats in the kitchen or storerooms. For many, their accommodation was a shared space with livestock. Think of it as a rustic Arab experience where the only amenity is survival. Legally, slaves were in a weird limbo. They were seen as property, not people, which meant zero rights. A slave's fate depended entirely on the temperament of their owner. The myth of the benevolent slave owner is just that, a myth. Sure, some slaves enjoyed slightly better conditions if their owners were particularly kind or needed their skills. But benevolent in this context often meant merely not being cruel. It's a low bar, folks. The Athenian legal system offered no protection. If a slave was wronged, their only recourse was to hope their master intervened, if they felt like it. Otherwise, slaves were left to endure injustices silently. They were the faceless cogs in the great Athenian machine, indispensable yet utterly expendable. Here's where things get interesting. Despite their dire conditions, slaves were integral to Athens' economic success. The city's wealth, its stunning architecture, its influence across the Mediterranean, all of it rested on the backs of those who had no stake in the society they supported. It's an economic model that echoes through history. Think about it. Even today, many industries rely on low-wage, often invisible labor to thrive. The parallels are as uncomfortable as they are undeniable. Slavery wasn't just an economic necessity, but a social norm. Even the most enlightened Athenians saw it as a given. Aristotle, that paragon of wisdom, rationalized slavery as natural and necessary. It's a classic case of cognitive dissonance, championing freedom and democracy while turning a blind eye to the chains at home. In this context, the Assembly's decisions on economy and policy often overlooked the very real human cost of their prosperity. It's like debating the ethics of fast fashion while wearing a shirt made in a sweatshop. The contradictions were stark, yet largely unchallenged in public discourse. So, as you wander through the sunlit streets of Athens, remember that every marble column, every grandiose speech about democracy is underscored by the labor of those who had no voice. It's a sobering thought that the city's greatness was built on the exploitation of the many for the glory of the few. And as we draw these parallels to modern economies, it's a reminder that the more things change, the more they eerily stay the same. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the complex tapestry of Athenian society. The saga isn't over, and there are still plenty of truths to uncover about this city of contradictions. Keep your himation fastened. Our journey through the past isn't done yet. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting the Athenian sky with hues of orange and purple, the city transitions from a hub of commerce to a playground of leisure. This is when Athens really lets its hair down, and the divide between citizens and slaves becomes all the more glaring. Citizens are gearing up for a night of revelry at a symposium, while slaves prepare to ensure those revelries run smoothly. It's a scene straight out of a history book, minus the rose-tinted glasses. Let's dive into the Athenian Symposium, a staple of upper-class social life where philosophy, politics, and poetry flowed as freely as the wine. Imagine it as a blend of a TED talk and a frat party, but with more hemlock debates and fewer red solo cups. Attendance was a privilege reserved for male citizens, and occasionally foreign dignitaries, though women, unless they were entertainers or courtesans, remained conspicuously absent. These gatherings were where Athenian men reclined on couches, indulging in discussions about the cosmos while slaves bustled about, refilling cups and clearing away the remnants of roasted meats and honey cakes. Economically, hosting a symposium wasn't a casual affair. It could set a host back a tidy sum, with a single amphora of wine costing upwards of 3 drachmas, half a week's wages for a skilled laborer. And that's before you factor in the cost of the entertainment. Musicians, dancers, and the occasional philosopher for hire added to the tab, making these events both a display of wealth and an investment in social capital. It was the ancient equivalent of throwing a lavish party to secure your spot in the social pecking order. Meanwhile, the state-sponsored events offered a different kind of spectacle. Theatres, like the famous theatre of Dionysus, opened their doors to the masses, blending high culture with the everyday. Admission to these dramatic performances was theoretically democratic, with even the poorest citizens given access through a state-sponsored fund. Yet, as always, the best seats in the house went to those who could afford them, reinforcing the societal hierarchy even in the realm of public entertainment. The plays themselves were a curious mix of comedy and tragedy, often reflecting societal norms and poking fun at the powerful. Aristophanes, for instance, wasn't shy about satirizing the politicians of his day, making the audience laugh while subtly critiquing the status quo. But remember, while citizens enjoyed these cultural feasts, slaves were relegated to the peripheries, catching glimpses of the stage when they could, if at all. Now, let's not ignore the elephant in the room, the stark contrast in recreational opportunities for slaves. For them, leisure was a foreign concept, their evenings spent in service rather than symposia. Their lives were a constant cycle of labor, with little time to enjoy the fruits of their toil. If they were fortunate, they might receive a rare day off during religious festivals, where they could partake in communal celebrations. But these moments were fleeting, and the return to servitude was inevitable. The myth of the leisurely, enlightened Athens crumbles when you consider who was actually allowed to partake in its cultural riches. The city that birthed democracy also shackled a significant portion of its population to a life devoid of freedom or leisure. Yet, the allure of Athenian culture remains, its intellectual and artistic achievements still celebrated today. It's the eternal paradox, how a society could reach such heights of cultural brilliance while standing on the shoulders of those it oppressed. As we wrap up our day in ancient Greece, consider the legacy of this fabled city. Athens gave the world democracy, philosophy, and theatre, yet it was also a place where inequality was woven into the very fabric of society. Today, we revere Athens for its contributions to Western civilization, but we must also acknowledge the dark underbelly that made such achievements possible. The enduring appeal of Athens lies in its complexities, the juxtaposition of enlightenment and exploitation, freedom and slavery. It's a reminder that history is seldom black and white. It's a tapestry of contradictions that mirror our own world. The myths of Athens are intoxicating, but it's the gritty reality that provides the most profound lessons. So, as you drift off to sleep, let the stories of Athens linger in your mind. They are tales of a society that was both a beacon of progress and a testament to human failings. In understanding ancient Greece, we gain insight into our own societal structures, the enduring struggles for equality, and the continuous pursuit of a more just world. And thus, the echoes of Athens persist, whispering through the annals of history, challenging us to learn from the past and strive for a better future. In the 19th century, Victorian balls weren't just the glitzy gatherings of high society. They were the Super Bowl of social events, where reputation was the prize and the cost of entry might have you clutching your pearls. To understand a Victorian ball, you've got to first picture the backdrop. A world where industrial soot and social ambition coexisted in a bizarre yet captivating dance. Britain was at its peak. The Industrial Revolution was chugging along like a steam engine on too much caffeine, and the British Empire was flexing its muscles across the globe. But within the confines of a grand ballroom, the only empire that mattered was social standing. Let's talk venues. These weren't your average community centres with a disco ball and a punch bowl. Oh no, these places were the architectural equivalent of a peacock flaunting its feathers. Take London's Almack's assembly rooms, for instance, where the chandeliers alone could probably pay off a small nation's debt. These spaces were adorned with everything from the finest crystal to the most opulent drapes, designed to impress and, quite frankly, intimidate. The idea was to create a spectacle that screamed wealth and taste, even if the host was barely scraping by on the family fortune. You see, throwing a ball was the Victorian equivalent of buying a new sports car, often a flashy way to distract from financial troubles. Now, let's untangle the social web. The Victorian era was a time when your last name could open doors or slam them shut. Balls were the gladiatorial arenas for young debutantes and their families, a place to parade eligible daughters in front of potential suitors like prized cattle. It wasn't just about finding a match, it was about finding the right match. The stakes were higher than a kite on a windy day. Marriage wasn't just a romantic notion, it was a transaction, a way to secure alliances and merge fortunes. In an era when the average worker earned about £60 a year, a single ball could cost a host upwards of £300. That's like throwing a party today that costs the equivalent of a brand new car, just to see and be seen. The planning was an exercise in both logistics and lunacy. Everything from the guest list to the menu had to be meticulously curated. Heaven forbid you served last year's favourite dish. What would the Duchess of so-and-so think? And don't get me started on the flowers. The Victorians were obsessed with what they called the language of flowers, where every petal and thorn could send a message more nuanced than a diplomat's memo. Choose your bouquet wisely, or risk offending Aunt Mildred and her influential friends. Societal hierarchy at these events was as rigid as a corset. You had the upper crust, the creme de la creme, waltzing around in their silks and satins, while the less fortunate nobility tried desperately to cling to their coattails. And then there were the nouveau rich, the new money, who were often looked at with a mix of envy and disdain, like a modern art piece no one quite understands. The balls were a social minefield where one misstep, a wrong dance partner, a faux pas in conversation, could spell social ruin. But let's not pretend it was all doom and gloom. There was an undeniable allure to these gatherings, a sense of magic and possibility. The myth of the Victorian ball, with its swirling gowns and whispered promises, persists because, for a few hours, it allowed people to transcend their everyday lives. Who wouldn't want to believe in a world where every dance could lead to true love, or at least a respectable marriage? Yet, beneath the glittering surface, these events mirrored the inequalities of the time. They were a stark reminder that in the Victorian era, social mobility was often as elusive as a gentleman's handkerchief at the end of a quadrille. The balls were a stage, and everyone played their part, a spectacle of opulence and ambition that could make or break a family's future. So, as we lace up our historical dancing shoes and step into this world, remember, these weren't just parties. They were battlegrounds, marketplaces, and occasionally the scene of a genuine romance or two. But mostly, they were the ultimate expression of a society obsessed with status, wealth, and the art of keeping up appearances. Speaking of keeping up appearances, let's dive into the fashion spectacle that was a Victorian ball. If you think getting dressed for your cousin's wedding is a hassle, try stepping into the shoes, literally, of a Victorian socialite. These were not just shoes. They were intricate puzzles made of leather, silk, and sometimes even satin, designed to torture your feet while looking fabulous. A Victorian ball was the Oscars of its time, and showing up in last season's gown was a social faux pas akin to wearing pajamas to a job interview. Fashion was a currency, and like any currency, it required serious investment. Ladies would spend upwards of £100 on a single dress. When you consider that this was more than what the average worker earned in a year, it's clear that these gowns were the equivalent of today's luxury cars. Beautiful, expensive, and highly impractical for everyday use. Now, let's talk about those dresses. Picture layers upon layers of fabric, each one more restrictive than the last. Corsets were the arch-nemesis of comfort, cinching waists down to gasp-inducing sizes. The ideal waist was a mere 18 inches. That's right, 18 inches, the circumference of a medium-sized pizza. And the hoops and petticoats. They were designed to make the skirts puff out like a soufflé, ensuring that personal space was more of a wish than a reality. These gowns were masterpieces of sartorial architecture, crafted to display wealth and status with every swish of taffeta. But let's not forget the real star of the show, the crinoline. This iron cage, wrapped in layers of fabric, was both a blessing and a curse. Sure, it gave the dress its voluminous shape, but heaven help you if you needed to dance, sit, or, God forbid, make a quick exit. The crinoline was notorious for catching fire, and yes, you heard that right, catching fire. Imagine waltzing past a candle and suddenly becoming a human torch. Fashion, it seems, was not for the faint of heart. Men, on the other hand, had it slightly easier, though they weren't off the hook entirely. They were expected to don tailcoats, waistcoats and trousers so tight they'd make a pair of skinny jeans blush. The top hat was the crowning glory, and no self-respecting gentleman would be caught dead without one. These sartorial choices were more than just clothing. They were a visual resume, broadcasting one's place in the social hierarchy with every step. But the real kicker, the discomfort, was all part of the appeal. The agony of a too-tight corset or a pinching shoe was a badge of honor, a testament to one's dedication to social climbing. It was the ultimate sacrifice for fashion, a commitment to looking good at all costs, even if it meant risking life and limb. And yet, amid all this discomfort, there was a certain magic to these ensembles. They transformed the wearer into an idealized version of themselves, a living, breathing work of art. The gowns, with their intricate lace and vibrant hues, were like walking canvases, each one telling a story of wealth, ambition, and desire. They were the original Instagram posts, designed to catch the eye and hold it. But let's not pretend it was all glamour and glitz. For every stunning ensemble, there was a fashion fail that would make the tabloids of today. Take, for instance, the case of Lady Florence Paget, whose gown famously split during a particularly vigorous quadrille, leaving her scrambling for the nearest exit. Or the Earl of Dudley, who reportedly turned up in mismatched shoes, an oversight that had tongues wagging for weeks. These fashion faux pas were the stuff of legend, whispered about in drawing rooms and printed in scandal sheets. They were cautionary tales, reminders of the razor-thin line between triumph and disaster. In a world where appearance was everything, a wardrobe malfunction could be as ruinous as a financial scandal. Yet, despite the risks and the discomfort, the allure of the Victorian ball was undeniable. It was a stage where the drama of human ambition played out in silk and satin, where the stakes were as high as the hairstyles. The myth of these balls, with their opulent fashion and whispered intrigues, endures because they captured the essence of the era, a time when the right outfit could open doors and the wrong one could slam them shut. So, as we lace up our historical corsets and adjust our top hats, remember, fashion in the Victorian era was more than just clothing. It was a language, a code, a status symbol. It was a testament to human creativity and folly, to the lengths people would go to maintain an image, even if it meant sacrificing comfort and common sense. And while we may chuckle at the absurdities of Victorian fashion, let's not forget the very real stakes that lay beneath the surface. A world where every stitch and seam was woven with ambition and aspiration. But don't hang up your dancing shoes just yet, because now we're stepping onto the dance floor, where the rhythm of the Victorian ball truly came alive, or stumbled, depending on your footwork. Welcome to the world of the waltz and the quadrille, where every step was a social contract, and every misstep could be a societal catastrophe. In the 19th century, dance was far more than just a way to shake off the cobwebs. It was a social skill as critical as knowing which fork to use at dinner. The waltz, for instance, was the tick-tock of its day, controversial, thrilling, and new. Originating in the ballrooms of Vienna, it waltzed its way into English society around the 1810s, spinning up a storm of scandal. Imagine the horror of the old guard, couples dancing in close contact, holding each other in a way that seemed positively indecent to the corseted matrons watching from the sidelines. It was the dirty dancing of its era minus Patrick Swayze, but with twice the societal uproar. Meanwhile, the quadrille was the stalwart of the dance card, a complex set of intricate figures that required more coordination than a synchronized swim team, performed by 4 couples in a square, or, if you were less refined, something resembling a tangled octopus. It was a dance that could make or break your social standing. If you flubbed a step, you risked a domino effect of embarrassment, not just for yourself, but for everyone in your immediate vicinity. Talk about peer pressure. The Victorian dance floor was a minefield of etiquette. Every movement was governed by a code as strict as a Victorian school marm. Ladies and gents had to maintain the appropriate distance, not too close, lest you invite gossip, and not too far, lest you appear uninterested. The dance card was your social agenda, a carefully curated list of whose arm you would be twirling on and when. Imagine the agony of being left with a blank card, the equivalent of having 0 likes on your social media post today. Now, let's talk about the orchestra, the unsung heroes of the ball. Without them, all you'd have is a room full of people awkwardly shuffling their feet in silence. These musical maestros were the DJs of their day, tucked away in the gallery, setting the tempo for love and heartbreak alike. They had to be as skilled in reading the room as they were in reading sheet music. A waltz that dragged could kill the mood faster than a spilled glass of claret on Aunt Mildred's gown. Of course, not every dance was a fairy tale. For every graceful twirl, there was a collision of crinolines. Imagine the chaos of a quadrille gone awry, with skirts and limbs flying in an unruly ballet. Or the horror of a debutante's slipper slipping off mid-waltz, sending her sprawling in a most unladylike fashion. These were the bloopers that could haunt a social season, the whispered legends that outlived the ball itself. Yet, despite the risks and the pressure, the dance floor was where magic happened, or at least the illusion of it. It was where stolen glances were exchanged, where whispered promises floated over the strains of a Strauss waltz. The appeal of the Victorian ball, with its rigid rules and high stakes, was this very tension between order and chaos, between the ideal and the inevitable blunder. So, as we twirl through the history of these balls, remember that beneath the elegance and etiquette lay a world as complicated and precarious as the era itself. The dance was a microcosm of Victorian society, a delicate balance of grace and gravity. It was a stage where every spin and step was a performance, where the right move could lead to romance or ruin. Stay tuned, because we've got more layers to this historical onion to peel back. Next time, we'll delve into the subtle art of conversation, the Victorian equivalent of a chess game played with words, where a single misplaced syllable could send ripples through the social pond. For now, keep practicing those dance steps, because in the 19th century ballroom, every footfall could be your last, or your finest. As we pivot from the dance floor's dizzying swirls to the buffet table's sumptuous spreads, let's uncover the delectable drama of Victorian ball catering, a culinary spectacle that could rival any modern Michelin-starred affair. Imagine, if you will, a banquet where the food was as much about social currency as it was about sustenance, where the menu was a meticulously curated gallery of gastronomic excess. Now, Victorian hosts weren't just serving up a meal. They were staging a culinary opera with a cast of thousands. Well, maybe not thousands, but certainly enough to feed an army. A typical ball might see between 200 to 500 guests, and with each one expecting to be impressed, the pressure on the kitchen staff was as intense as a soufflé on the edge of collapse. The centerpiece of this edible extravaganza was often a towering piece-montée, a gravity-defying sculpture of sugar and pastry designed to awe and intimidate. These sugar showpieces were the Instagram posts of their time, a visual wonder meant to be admired more than consumed, though nibbling was certainly allowed. Imagine a confectionery Eiffel Tower or a marzipan Buckingham Palace, a testament to the host's wealth and the chef's skill. Yet the piemonte was just the opening act. The real action unfolded in the main courses, where roast beef the size of a small pony and turkeys that could double as holiday mascots took center stage. It was a carnivore's paradise, with dishes that proclaimed the host's ability to procure the finest meats, even if the family budget was tighter than a corset on Christmas Eve. But let's not forget the supporting cast of side dishes and desserts. Victorians had a penchant for jellies that wobbled more precariously than a debutante's first quadrille. These gelatinous creations, often molded into the shapes of fruits, animals, or anything whimsically inedible, were the culinary equivalent of a practical joke, delightful until they slid off the table in a quivering heap. And then there were the pastries, layered with enough butter and sugar to make a cardiologist weep. Of course, all this indulgence came at a cost. Hosting a ball could set back a Victorian family by several £100s, a sum that today might cover a lavish wedding or a down payment on a Tesla. It was a financial gamble, a high-stakes game of culinary poker where the ante was the host's reputation. Skimping on the spread was not an option. One serving of undercooked pheasant or watered-down punch could send whispers through the drawing rooms faster than you could say, social ruin. Speaking of punch, let's raise a glass, or perhaps a bowl, to the liquid courage that flowed as freely as the gossip. Victorian punch was a heady concoction of spirits, spices and fruit, potent enough to set tongues wagging and feet tapping. It was the social lubricant that fueled both conversation and the occasional scandal. But here's the kicker. Sometimes the punch packed a punch. More than one guest found themselves face down in the ferns after a few too many ladles of the stuff, providing endless fodder for the society pages. Yet, amid the extravagance and excess, there were occasional culinary catastrophes. Imagine the horror of a soufflé collapsing in the kitchen, or worse, a guest collapsing from an overindulgence of game pie. Food poisoning was the uninvited guest that no one wanted to acknowledge, but everyone feared. And then there were the rumors, whispered tales of a rival hostess's salmon mousse that tasted suspiciously of the Thames. Despite the risks of indigestion and social faux pas, food at a Victorian ball was a status symbol, a way to broadcast one's place in the social pecking order. It was as much about spectacle as it was about sustenance, a feast for the eyes as well as the stomach. The myth of endless indulgence persists because it was, in many ways, true for those who could afford it. For the rest, it was a tantalizing glimpse into a world of opulence and excess, a reminder of the social divide that was as wide as the buffet table itself. Yet, for all the opulence, there was an undeniable charm to these culinary creations. They were a testament to human ingenuity and ambition, a reflection of a society that valued appearances as much as taste. The allure of the Victorian ball, with its lavish spreads and whispered intrigues, endures because it captured the essence of the era, a time when food and drink were as much a part of the social dance as the waltz or quadrille. So, as we savor the flavors of this bygone era, remember that beneath the glistening surface lay a world of competition, ambition, and the ever-present threat of indigestion. The myth and reality of Victorian balls were intertwined, a dance of decadence and decorum that could make or break a family standing. And as we prepare to delve into the subtleties of Victorian conversation, a game of verbal chess played with wit and words, keep in mind that every bite and sip was a move in the grand social game. The ballroom was more than just a stage. It was a battlefield of manners, where the right fork and the right phrase could determine one's fate. Stay tuned, because we're about to dive into the art of Victorian conversation, where every word was weighted with meaning, and silence could be as telling as a soliloquy. In the meantime, perhaps pour yourself a glass of something strong. After all, even the most seasoned Victorian would need a stiff drink to navigate the social labyrinth of a ball. And so, dear listener, as we sip our imaginary punch and prepare for the verbal sparring match that was Victorian conversation. Let's step back and consider the grand tapestry of change that slowly unraveled those opulent balls. By the time the 20th century rolled around, those glittering soirees were going the way of the dodo, leaving behind a trail of taffeta and tarnished silverware. So, what exactly happened to these social circuses? Well, it turns out that even the grandest of parties can't outrun the march of progress. The decline of the Victorian ball was no single-stroke drama. It was more of a slow fade, like a waltz winding to a halt. Socio-economic shifts, cultural changes, and newfangled entertainments all played their part in dimming the chandeliers. Firstly, let's chat about money, because, as any Victorian would tell you, cash ruled everything around them. The end of the 19th century saw industrialization shift into high gear, and with it came the rise of a new middle class. These folks weren't content to sit on the sidelines in the social game. They wanted in. But unlike the old aristocracy, with their dusty titles and inherited debts, this new breed of socialite had cash, fresh, shiny, and ready to spend on more immediate pleasures than a ball's marathon of etiquette. As the century turned, the economic landscape was changing faster than a debutante's dance card. The world wars, those colossal game changers, tightened purse strings and shifted priorities. The financial extravagance of a ball seemed as outdated as a powdered wig in this new, less ceremonious world. After all, why throw a soiree when you could invest in something with a bit more staying power, like, say, a reliable automobile? Cue the cultural shifts. As class barriers began to blur, so did the strictures of Victorian social norms. The ballroom's rigid hierarchy began to look more like a relic than a requirement. By the Edwardian era, the allure of the ball was competing with the electric thrill of the cinema, the jazz-filled dance halls, and eventually the rock and roll clubs of the mid-20th century. Imagine swapping a stiff quadrille for a swing dance, tempting, right? Then there was the small matter of personal freedom. The post-Victorian age brought with it a more relaxed approach to socializing. The corset came off, literally and figuratively. The younger generation, with their bobbed hair and rebellious spirit, wanted less formality and more fun. They were less inclined to parade around a ballroom, weighed down by the expectations of yesteryear. Instead, they sought venues where they could cut loose without Aunt Mildred raising an eyebrow. But let's not bid adieu to the Victorian ball without acknowledging its lingering legacy. There's a reason Hollywood and literature still romanticize these glittering gatherings. They were, after all, the stage for some of the era's most captivating dramas. The Victorian ball was a world where every glance could be loaded with meaning, where the flicker of a fan was a language in itself. For all its impracticalities, the ball was a realm of possibility, a place where social rules were both enforced and cleverly bent. Sure, the balls were exclusive and expensive, but they were also electrifying. They thrived on a tantalizing tension between appearance and reality, a dance of decorum and desire that still echoes in our imaginations. The myth of the Victorian ball endures because it captures the human penchant for spectacle and status, a relentless pursuit of the ideal, even when the ideal was perched precariously on a pair of too tight shoes. In closing, while today's social gatherings may favor casual wear and craft beer over corsets and champagne, we owe a nod to those bygone balls. They remind us of a world where social ambition was as grand as the chandeliers, and where every step, every note, every whispered word held the promise of something greater. The Victorian ball might have danced its last, but its legacy waltzes on, a testament to an era of grand gestures and even grander dreams. So next time you find yourself at a party, perhaps raise a glass to those forgotten soirees and the stories they spun, a toast to the past, as we dance into a future that remains just as unpredictable, if a tad more comfortable. In the bustling town of Trier, Germany, 1818, Karl Marx made his grand entrance into a world that wasn't quite ready for him. Born into a middle-class family, his father, Heinrich, was a lawyer who converted from Judaism to Protestantism. Talk about a career move. And his mother, Henriette, came from a long line of rabbis. It's like Marx was predestined for a life of ideological conflict and change, right from the crib. Young Karl was a bit of a firecracker. Picture him as the kind of kid who would have been the nightmare of every 19th century schoolmaster, except with a penchant for pissing off philosophers rather than just stealing apples. By the time he hit university, first at the University of Bonn, and then at the more prestigious University of Berlin, Marx had developed a reputation for being somewhat unruly. Think of him as the student whose name was perpetually on the dean's lips, and not because of his stellar academic performance. In Bonn, Marx was less focused on law, the subject his father had hoped would lead him to a lucrative career, and more on beer, poetry, and dueling. Yes, you heard that right, dueling. Forget modern-day Facebook spats. This was the era where settling differences with swordplay was still in vogue. At one point, Marx even ended up in jail for disturbing the peace with his rowdy behavior. But the real kicker came when he joined a club called the Trier Tavern Club, whose name alone should clue you in on their main activities. Unsurprisingly, Marx's academic performance wasn't exactly stellar, and his father decided it was time for a change. Enter the University of Berlin, where Marx was supposed to buckle down and focus on law. Instead, he got swept up in the philosophical debates of the young Hegelians, a group of intellectual rebels who were more interested in questioning the status quo than memorizing legal statutes. Here, Marx found his tribe, or maybe they found him. Either way, the guy who was supposed to be learning about torts and contracts was now neck-deep in discussions about metaphysics and the nature of existence. But here's where it gets interesting. Marx's journey wasn't all highbrow intellectualism and no consequences. He managed to get himself kicked out of Berlin, an impressive feat, considering how many radicals the institution tolerated at the time. It was like getting booted from a pirate ship for being too rowdy. Rumor has it that his doctoral dissertation was too hot for the German universities to handle, so he had to submit it to the more liberal University of Jena, which granted him a Ph.D. for what was essentially a philosophical firebomb. With a shiny new doctorate in hand and a head full of revolutionary ideas, Marx looked to journalism. He took a job as the editor of the Rheinische Zeitung, a newspaper that quickly gained notoriety for its radical positions, which mostly involved poking the Prussian government with a metaphorical stick. Unsurprisingly, this didn't go over well with the authorities, and the paper was shut down in 1843. It was Marx's first, but certainly not his last run-in with governmental displeasure. Financial trouble was a constant companion for Marx. Despite marrying Jenny von Westphalen, a woman from an aristocratic family, their lives were anything but opulent. It's almost comical to think that the father of communism, a man who would later write extensively about economic systems, couldn't balance his own checkbook. He often relied on handouts from his friend Friedrich Engels, a wealthy industrialist-cum-socialist who was essentially the silent partner in Marx's intellectual escapades. Speaking of Engels, he and Marx were like the Batman and Robin of revolutionary thought, minus the capes and gadgets, of course. They met in Paris, where Marx had moved after his newspaper debacle. Paris in the 1840s was a hotbed of revolutionary ideas, a place where you could toss a stone and hit a radical. It was here that Marx and Engels began their famous collaboration, eventually leading to the publication of the Communist Manifesto in 1848. But that's a tale for another time. Back to the young Marx, who seemed to have a knack for getting kicked out of places. After Paris, it was Brussels, and then it was back to Paris, only to be expelled again. The pattern was almost comical. Marx would settle in, start writing incendiary material, and then find himself on the next train out. It's like he was playing a personal game of geopolitical hopscotch, with each stop contributing to the development of his revolutionary ideas. Despite the chaos, or perhaps because of it, Marx's early life was a crucible for his later work. The financial instability, the constant relocations, and the love-hate relationship with academia all played a role in shaping his theories on capitalism and class struggle. And while it's tempting to romanticize the image of Marx as a lone genius, The reality was far less glamorous. He was a man caught between worlds, forever struggling to reconcile his radical ideas with the practical needs of everyday life. By the mid-1840s, Marx had already started to formulate the ideas that would eventually underpin his critique of political economy. His early writings, a mix of fiery rhetoric and philosophical musings, were like a preview of coming attractions. They laid the groundwork for what would become his magnum opus, Das Kapital, but that was still years away. For now, Marx was the perpetual outsider, a thinker without a home, both literally and intellectually. As we leave young Marx behind, it's worth noting the irony embedded in his story. Here was a man expelled from universities and countries alike, yet he would go on to inspire movements that reshaped nations. His early life was a series of misadventures that seemed to defy any coherent narrative, yet they formed the chaotic backdrop against which his revolutionary ideas took shape. So next time you hear someone refer to Karl Marx with reverence or disdain, remember that he was once just a scrappy young man with a penchant for dueling and a knack for getting kicked out of places. And so the saga of Karl Marx continues, a tale as full of drama as any soap opera, but with more intellectual heft and fewer dramatic pauses. After his escapades through German academia and a brief stint in Paris, Marx found himself in Brussels, 1845. Brussels, a city that today is better known for waffles and bureaucrats, was back then a melting pot of revolutionary ideas. And let's be honest, a far less glamorous backdrop than Paris, the city of light. But what Brussels lacked in panache, it made up for in opportunity, at least for a man like Marx who had been shown the door by more than one government. Now, enter Friedrich Engels, the sidekick every revolutionary thinker never knew they needed. Engels was the well-off son of a German industrialist who owned textile mills in Manchester, England. Picture this. Engels, the heir to a business empire, spends his days working in his family's industry, and his nights penning critiques of the very system that kept him in cravats and coattails. Talk about biting the hand that feeds you. Engels was practically gnawing at it. The two met in Paris in 1844, and it was as if the universe had finally given Marx the partner in crime he so desperately needed. Their bromance, and yes, it's fair to call it that, was fueled by a shared disdain for capitalism. Engels, with his aristocratic air and financial backing, provided the stability Marx desperately needed. Let's just say Engels was the friend who always had cash for the bar tab, enabling Marx to keep philosophizing without worrying about where the next meal was coming from. It's a bit ironic, isn't it? The father of communism, reliant on the generosity of a capitalist to keep the lights on. But hey, history is nothing if not a master of irony. In Brussels, Marx and Engels were a powerhouse of revolutionary thought. Together, they penned The German Ideology in 1846, a sprawling critique of contemporary philosophy, and the first comprehensive exposition of what would later be known as historical materialism. It was dense, it was radical, and unsurprisingly, it never saw the light of day until long after both men were dead. Publishers, it seems, weren't eager to print a manuscript that was basically a flaming arrow aimed at the status quo. But let's not forget the human side of this intellectual juggernaut. Despite their prodigious output, Marx and Engels were also world-class procrastinators, as evidenced by their towering stacks of unpaid bills. Marx, in particular, was a walking financial disaster. He was perpetually broke, living in perpetual debt, and constantly just a step away from eviction. It's almost as if he viewed his financial woes as a form of research for his critiques on capitalism, method acting, 19th century style. Marx's personal life was a comedy of errors, too. Imagine trying to raise a family while juggling political activism, philosophical debates, and the occasional eviction notice. His wife, Jenny von Westphalen, was his rock, but even the most steadfast partner would struggle with the constant upheaval. The Marx household was frequently a scene of chaos, with creditors knocking, children crying, and Marx scribbling furiously amidst the cacophony. It's a wonder he got anything done at all. Yet, amidst this chaos, Marx and Engels managed to churn out some of the most influential works in political philosophy. Their collaboration in Brussels was like a creative boot camp, intense, demanding, and incredibly productive. This period saw the creation of the Communist Correspondence Committee, a network designed to unite socialist thinkers across Europe. They were laying the groundwork for what would eventually become the Communist League, a precursor to the more famous First International. The duo's ideas were as revolutionary as their beard game. Both were epic in scale and ambition. Marx and Engels sported facial hair that could easily rival any modern-day hipster, but their ideas were anything but trendy. They were radical, challenging the very foundations of society by arguing that the history of all hitherto existing society was the history of class struggles. It was a bold claim, one that resonated with the disenchanted and terrified the establishment. But this wasn't just two men shouting into the void. The socio-economic context of the 1840s was ripe for their ideas. Europe was undergoing massive industrial change, with cities growing at unprecedented rates and working conditions often deplorable. Engels had seen firsthand the harsh realities of industrial capitalism while working in Manchester, documenting them in his groundbreaking book, The Condition of the Working Class in England, in 1845. His vivid descriptions of the squalid conditions faced by workers lent a visceral urgency to their joint endeavors. Marx and Engels were not just theorizing from ivory towers. They were engaging with the gritty realities of their time. Their partnership was a potent mix of theory and practice, a combination that would later make their work resonate across continents and generations. The world was a tinderbox of social unrest, and Marx and Engels were all too eager to provide the spark. Yet, despite their intellectual synergy, life for Marx in Brussels was far from stable. His political activities attracted the attention of the Belgian authorities, who were not especially keen on harboring a man whose ideas could potentially inspire insurrection. By 1848, the revolutionary wave sweeping through Europe made Marx too hot to handle, and he was expelled from Belgium. It's a miracle he had any friends left willing to take him in. Back in Paris, Marx once again found himself embroiled in the whirlwind of revolutionary fervor. The year 1848 was a turning point, a year where the streets of Europe echoed with cries for change. Revolutions burst forth like wildfires, and Marx, ever the opportunist, was right there in the thick of it. The political cauldron of Paris was both intoxicating and perilous, and Marx's presence was as magnetic as it was incendiary. But let's not pretend it was all noble struggles and high-minded ideals. Marx's political life was as much about squabbling with fellow revolutionaries as it was about fighting the establishment. He had a knack for alienating allies with his sharp tongue and uncompromising stance. If there was a political feud to be had, Marx was usually right in the middle of it, often creating as many enemies as he did converts. Yet, through the evictions, exiles, and endless bickering, Marx's ideas continued to evolve. Each setback seemed only to refine his theories, sharpening them into tools that would later reshape the world. His time in Paris and Brussels was a crucible, testing both his resolve and his ideas. And while he may have been an outsider in more ways than one, the legacy he left was anything but marginal. As we prepare to delve deeper into Marx's journey, remember that this was a man whose life was as chaotic as the ideas he championed. A thinker who, despite, or perhaps because of, his personal trials, managed to leave an indelible mark on history. The tale of Marx and Engels is far from over. Their revolutionary road has many more turns ahead. So strap in as we continue this wild ride through the life of the man who dared to challenge the very fabric of society. Marx's revolutionary road led him to London in 1849, a city teeming with soot, smog, and the kind of vibrant chaos that would either inspire you or drive you to insanity, or both if you were Karl Marx. London was the heart of the British Empire, a sprawling metropolis of over 2 million people, and ironically, the capital of capitalism. For Marx, it was the perfect backdrop to pen his critiques while living in conditions that would make a Dickensian orphan wince. Upon arrival, Marx, Jenny, and their growing brood settled in Soho, a neighborhood that was as close to a refugee camp for exiled revolutionaries as you could get. Picture a cramped, two-room apartment on Dean Street, where the noise of the bustling city was matched only by the clamor inside. The Marx household was a swirling vortex of intellectual debate and domestic bedlam. It was here that Marx, the father of communism, lived in what can only be described as the ultimate irony, abject poverty. The Marx family finances were a perpetual disaster zone. Karl's ability to manage money was about as effective as a sieve holding water. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, Marx had a unique perspective on the economic struggles of the working class. His personal financial woes were a real-life case study in the pitfalls of capitalism, lending a certain authenticity to his critiques. But let's not romanticize his struggles. There was nothing glamorous about sharing a bed with 3 children or debating philosophy while dodging debt collectors. Enter Friedrich Engels, Marx's financial life jacket. Engels, the Batman to Marx's financially confused Robin, continued to funnel money from his family's successful textile business in Manchester to Marx's perpetually empty coffers. Engels was like an ATM with a heart, posthumously funding Marx's intellectual pursuits. It's the kind of friendship that makes you wonder if Engels ever regretted it every time he balanced his own books. Despite the chaos, Marx found solace in the hallowed halls of the British Museum, where he spent countless hours poring over economic tomes. The museum's reading room was his sanctuary, offering a quiet refuge from the cacophony of his home life. Here, surrounded by the musty smell of old books, Marx embarked on his magnum opus, Das Kapital. It was the intellectual equivalent of building a cathedral, brick by philosophical brick. Das Kapital was the result of years of research, and if Marx's financial state was any indicator, he knew all too well the intricacies of economic exploitation. Here's the kicker, though. Das Kapital wasn't just a dry analysis of economics. It was a monumental critique of capitalism, dissecting its quirks with the precision of a surgeon and the flair of a novelist. By the time it was published in 1867, Marx had spent nearly 2 decades refining his thoughts, and it showed. Balancing his roles as a revolutionary thinker and a family man was no easy feat. Marx's household was a whirlwind of intellectual fervor and domestic drama. His children, of which he had 7, though only 3 survived to adulthood, were often sick, a grim reminder of the harsh realities of 19th-century living conditions. Jenny, his wife, was a stalwart partner in both intellect and endurance, often acting as the buffer between Marx and the practicalities of life he was prone to overlook. Amidst this chaos, Marx's theories evolved. He was not just criticizing capitalism. He was trying to understand it in all its complexity. His economic theories were not born in a vacuum, but were a response to the seismic shifts of his time. The Industrial Revolution had turned the world on its head, creating vast wealth for a select few while plunging many into poverty. Marx saw this disparity and sought to explain it, to expose the mechanisms that allowed such inequality to flourish under the guise of progress. While Marx's theories focused on the macro, his life was a constant reminder of the micro struggles faced by ordinary people. He was living proof of the very systems he sought to critique, a man trapped in the contradictions of his own beliefs. Yet, despite the hardships, or perhaps because of them, Marx's work resonated with those who felt disenfranchised by the relentless march of capitalism. In London, Marx's influence began to spread, albeit slowly. Das Kapital was not an overnight sensation, but it planted seeds of thought that would later grow into movements. His ideas were like a slow-burning fuse, igniting a dialogue that would eventually explode into global revolutions. But for now, Marx remained a man of ideas, living in relative obscurity, surrounded by the very chaos that fueled his work. Yet, let's not pretend Marx was a saintly figure. He was notoriously difficult, often embroiled in bitter disputes with fellow socialists. His sharp tongue and uncompromising nature won him as many enemies as it did allies. In the world of 19th-century revolutionary politics, friendships were as fleeting as the paper his pamphlets were printed on. But through all the turmoil, Marx's legacy was being forged. His time in London was a crucible, shaping both his thought and his impact on the world. He was a man caught between the lofty ideals of his revolutionary vision and the gritty realities of everyday life. His story is a testament to the messy, often contradictory nature of human endeavor, a reminder that even the most profound ideas are born out of the chaos of lived experience. So, as we continue to follow the trajectory of Marx's life, remember that this was a man who lived in the eye of the storm, a thinker who dared to confront the world as it was, even as he dreamed of what it could be. The journey is far from over, and the next chapter promises even more twists in this saga of ideas and ideals. Hang on, because the ride is only getting wilder. Life in London for Marx was a twisted paradox, a thinker of monumental ideas living in monumental squalor. Yet, amid the chaos, Marx and Engels managed to churn out the Communist Manifesto in 1848, a document initially as well received as a telemarketer's call during dinner. This manifesto wasn't just another pamphlet to be tossed on the revolutionary pile. It was a passionate call to arms. But let's be real, at the time, it was as popular as a wet sock. The Communist Manifesto, co-authored by Engels, was a firebrand of a document, a rallying cry for the proletariat to rise against the bourgeoisie. Its opening line, "A spectre is haunting Europe, the spectre of communism," was both ominous and thrilling, setting the stage for what was essentially a political thriller in manifesto form. But in 1848, Europe was a hot mess of revolutions, and Marx's incendiary pamphlet was just another voice in the cacophony. It wasn't exactly an instant bestseller. In fact, it was largely ignored. Imagine publishing the manifesto equivalent of a viral tweet and getting 0 retweets. Despite its lackluster debut, the manifesto was a synthesis of Marx's and Engels' critiques of capitalism, laying out the principles of what they saw as the inevitable class struggle. It was a manifesto with more bite than a rabid terrier, and yet it initially had the impact of a whisper in a hurricane. The revolutions of 1848 came and went, leaving Marx's bold proclamations floating awkwardly in the wind. It's as if the world gave a collective shrug and moved on, leaving Marx to wonder if anyone had read past the first paragraph. But here's the twist. While the manifesto was collecting dust, Marx's ideas were brewing like a slow-drip coffee. Over time, they began to resonate with the disenfranchised workers who were starting to question the system that promised prosperity, but delivered mostly soot and sweat. It was the sleeper hit of political documents, the kind that people only started appreciating long after the initial buzz had fizzled out. Think of it as the arrested development of revolutionary texts, overlooked in its time, but destined for cult status. During his lifetime, Marx's theories were like the proverbial seeds planted in rocky soil. They didn't exactly flourish while he was around to tend them. His ideas were more popular in the afterlife than during his actual life, a posthumous hit, if you will. Marx's works were like that band whose greatest hits album only skyrockets after they've broken up. In fact, Marx didn't live to see the Communist Manifesto gain the traction it would eventually receive in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Yet Marx's writings were not just political diatribes. They were a mix of economic analysis, historical criticism, and philosophical musings, a trifecta aimed at dissecting the beast that was capitalism. His magnum opus, Does Capital?, was the culmination of his lifelong critique, a dense tome that required the patience of a saint and the intellect of a scholar to fully digest. It was published in 1867, a full 2 decades after the manifesto, and contained a deep dive into the workings of capitalist economies. But much like the manifesto, it too was initially about as popular as a root canal. The irony: while Marx was alive, his ideas were often misunderstood, misrepresented, and misappropriated. The socialist movements that cropped up in the late 19th century frequently cherry-picked his theories, using them to justify agendas that Marx himself might have raised an eyebrow at. It's like his disciples were playing a game of philosophical telephone, where the original message gets increasingly garbled as it passes down the line. Even in his own circles, Marx was a polarizing figure. His sharp wit and sharper critiques often alienated potential allies. He was the kind of guy who could start a fight in an empty room, and his penchant for drama rivaled any modern-day reality show. His disputes with fellow socialists were legendary, often leaving bridges scorched and alliances shattered. Yet, despite his prickly nature, or perhaps because of it, his ideas continued to simmer beneath the surface of European political thought. Despite the misunderstandings and the misfires, Marx's theories had undeniable appeal. They tapped into the cultural zeitgeist of the Industrial Revolution, a time when the disparities between the wealthy and the working class were becoming painfully apparent. Marx's critique of capitalism was a mirror held up to society, reflecting the inequalities that many were starting to question. His ideas were like intellectual kindling, waiting for a spark to ignite them. Fast forward to his death in 1883, when Marx's contributions were finally beginning to gain the recognition they deserved. It's the ultimate irony. In life, he was the perennial outsider, the man whose ideas were too radical for the mainstream. In death, he became a symbol, an icon for those seeking to challenge the status quo. His grave in London's Highgate Cemetery became a pilgrimage site for socialists, communists, and curious minds alike. It's as if the world finally realized what it had lost only after he was gone. So why did Marx's ideas endure? Why did they resonate long after the man himself had left the stage? The answer lies in their universal themes. Marx's critique of capitalism wasn't just about economics. It was about power, inequality, and the human condition. His ideas transcended their time, speaking to the struggles of people across generations. They offered a lens through which to view the world, a framework for understanding the complexities of society. Yet, as with any influential figure, Marx's legacy is a tangled web. His ideas have been both revered and reviled, embraced and abused. They've been used to justify everything from social reforms to authoritarian regimes, often straying far from Marx's original intentions. It's a testament to the power of his ideas that they've been so widely interpreted and misinterpreted, twisted and turned to suit myriad agendas. In the end, Marx's ideas had a life of their own, evolving and adapting long after their creator had penned his final words. They became a cornerstone of political thought, influencing movements and ideologies around the world. And while Marx himself was often mired in the minutiae of his personal struggles, his ideas soared far beyond the confines of his cramped London apartment. As we look back on Marx's journey, it's clear that his impact was more profound than even he might have imagined. His theories challenged the status quo, inspired generations of thinkers, and ignited debates that continue to this day. In the grand theatre of history, Marx was both a player and a playwright, a man whose ideas left an indelible mark on the world stage. And as we prepare to delve into the final chapter of his story, one thing is certain. The legacy of Karl Marx is far from finished. As Karl Marx's ideas continue to ripple through the fabric of history, we find ourselves at the crux of his legacy, a legacy as tangled and multifaceted as the man himself. Fast forward 140 years after his death, and you'll notice his name still tossed around like confetti at a political rally. But why does Marx matter in a world that can now fit all of human knowledge into a device small enough to lose in your couch cushions? First, let's strip away the caricature of Marx as the eternal brooder, the intellectual hermit cloistered in musty libraries, penning diatribes against capitalism. Sure, the man had a beard that could double as a bird's nest and a penchant for lengthy monologues, but he was no mere armchair philosopher. If anything, Marx was a boots-on-the-ground kind of guy, often literally, as he shuffled between cities with the authorities hot on his trail. His life was less a cozy academic retreat and more a series of evictions and exiles, peppered with enough family drama to rival a soap opera. Yet, the myth of Marx as a distant, aloof thinker persists, and it's as misleading as it is enduring. The truth is, Marx was profoundly engaged with the world around him, his theories deeply rooted in the economic upheavals of the 19th century. It was a time when steam engines were revolutionizing industry, and workers were trading agrarian fields for factory floors. If Marx were around today, he'd probably be furiously tweeting about the gig economy and the rise of automation, pointing out that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Marx's theories were born out of the harsh realities he witnessed: rampant inequality, child labor, and the commodification of human life. His opus, Does Capital?, is less a dusty tome and more a scathing indictment of a system he saw as fundamentally flawed. It's like he took a magnifying glass to capitalism, only to find a crack running right through its heart. The book wasn't just about economics. It was an attempt to peel back the layers of society and expose the power dynamics that kept the wealthy perched comfortably atop their gilded thrones. As for his personal life, the myth of Marx as a misunderstood family man deserves its own footnote in the annals of history. While it's tempting to paint him as the absentee father who left his wife, Jenny, to wrangle their brood of children amidst financial ruin, this narrative misses the mark. Yes, Marx was often absorbed in his work, but he was also deeply devoted to his family. He mourned the loss of his children with a grief that cut to the bone, a stark reminder that even the most revolutionary of thinkers was not immune to the visceral pains of human existence. Now, let's talk about the big picture. Marx's ideas on class struggle and economic systems have wormed their way into the DNA of modern thought, influencing everything from political policies to pop culture. His concept of class warfare might seem quaint in an era of billionaires and influencers, but look closer, and you'll see its echoes in the ongoing debates about wealth inequality and corporate power. It's as if Marx handed us a pair of spectacles to view the world, and once you've put them on, it's hard to take them off. And then there's the question of whether Marx would be flattered or horrified by his posthumous fame. On one hand, he'd probably appreciate that his critiques of capitalism remain relevant, a testament to the enduring issues he sought to address. On the other hand, watching his name used to justify everything from democratic socialism to totalitarian regimes might have him spinning in his grave with the vigor of a wind turbine. For Marx, who envisioned a society where individuals could flourish free from economic shackles, the ways his theories have been twisted and turned could well be the ultimate irony. As we wrap up this whirlwind tour through Marx's legacy, let's not forget the human behind the ideology. Marx was a man of contradictions, an idealist wrestling with pragmatism, a radical thinker navigating the constraints of his time. His journey was as messy and unpredictable as the revolutions he inspired, a reminder that history is rarely neat and tidy, but rather a tapestry woven from the threads of countless lives and ideas. In the end, Marx's impact isn't just found in dusty volumes or political manifestos. It lives on in the questions we ask about power, justice, and human dignity. It's in the debates raging on social media, in the protests filling city streets, and in the quiet moments of reflection when we ponder what kind of world we want to build. Whether you view him as a prophet or a pariah, there's no denying that Marx's ideas continue to provoke, inspire, and challenge, making him a permanent fixture in the complex mosaic of human history. And so, as the curtain falls on our exploration of Karl Marx, we're left with a legacy that's as compelling as it is controversial. A story that invites us to question the status quo and consider the possibilities of what lies beyond. Because in the end, the true power of Marx's ideas may not be in the answers they provide, but in the conversations they spark. And isn't that what any great thinker hopes to achieve? You crack open your eyes just as the sun begins its golden ascent over the city of Rome. The rooster's crowing, your ancient alarm clock, announces it's around 5 a.m. Not exactly a gentle wake-up call, but hey, you're a Roman senator, not a diva. The air is filled with the soft, distant hum of a city gearing up for another chaotic day. This is Rome, where the streets pulse with life, and even at this ungodly hour, the whispers of the eternal city are already tickling your ears. Now, about that toga. Wearing one isn't exactly like throwing on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt. The toga is your status symbol, your declaration to the world that you've made it in this cutthroat society. But don't be fooled. This isn't a one-man job. Draping a toga, especially the pristine white toga virilis of a Roman senator, is an art form. It's like wrapping yourself in a massive, uncooperative bedsheet, only with the added pressure of nailing every fold and pleat to perfection. You've got slaves to help you with this morning ritual, because let's face it, you're not going to win any toga draping contests on your own. This 9-yard, yep 9, fabric monster requires a team effort. Think of it as the original couture, time-consuming, painstaking, and utterly essential for maintaining your image. With your toga finally draped, you can turn your attention to breakfast. Forget about eggs Benedict or avocado toast. It's bread dipped in wine for you. It's a simple affair, but in a city where grain prices can dictate the mood of the masses, this humble meal is a reminder of your place in the social hierarchy. Bread is your staple, as it is for most Romans, but the wine, that's the senator's touch. It's not the finest vintage, but it's a step above what the plebs are sipping, and that distinction matters. You might unearth a few olives or figs if you're feeling fancy, but don't get too carried away. Morning indulgence isn't quite your style, at least not before the sun is fully up. The city outside is waking up too. Vendors are setting up shop. The clatter of carts rolling over cobblestones begins, and somewhere, a gladiator is probably getting ready for his big moment in the arena. Your villa's atrium, with its open roof and impluvium pool, lets the sounds drift in, a constant reminder that while you might be a step above the average Roman, you're still very much a part of this bustling hive. And let's pause here for a moment to debunk a myth, the romanticized notion of Rome as a clean marble city. Sure, the wealthy enjoy their spacious villas, but the reality, Rome is a noisy, smelly place. The streets are narrow, filled with the stench of refuse and the noise of 1,000 conversations overlapping. It's a living, breathing organism, and not always a pleasant one. But for those like you at the top of the social heap, there's a certain charm to it all. After all, power isn't just in the Senate. It's in knowing you're part of something bigger, something eternal. As a senator, your morning isn't just about getting dressed or breaking your fast. It's about checking in on your household, ensuring everything is running smoothly. Your slaves have their tasks. Your clients are probably lining up outside for their morning salutatio, a daily ritual where they pay respects, and in return, you dole out favors or advice. It's a symbiotic relationship, a dance as old as time, where loyalty is a currency as valuable as any coin. You might even spot a few freedmen among the crowd, those who have earned their freedom yet still cling to the patronage of their former masters. It's these intricate social bonds that keep the Roman world spinning. This morning, as you sip your wine-soaked bread, you might consider the political landscape. Julius Caesar's shadow looms large, and the Senate isn't the powerhouse it once was. Your role, while prestigious, is fraught with tension. Alliances shift as quickly as the sands, and one wrong move could see you toppled. But that's all part of the thrill, isn't it? The knowledge that today you'll step into the Curia, that ancient assembly hall, and play your part in the grand theatre of Roman politics. But first, there's the matter of making it through breakfast without spilling wine on your toga. Because while Rome might be forgiving of many things, a stained toga is not one of them. So, with your morning rituals complete, and your mind already turning to the day's agenda, you prepare to step into the beating heart of the empire, ready to navigate its challenges and seize its opportunities. With your toga pristine and your mind sharpened, you step out of your villa into the bustling streets of Rome, ready to tackle the day. The air is filled with the aroma of freshly baked bread, and less pleasantly, the stench of yesterday's leftovers. Welcome to Rome, where the grandeur of the city's architecture is matched only by the grim reality of its sanitation. Your route to the Senate takes you past marble temples dedicated to gods who, you suspect, don't much care for the refuse piling up against their columns. Let's walk and talk about the economics of this sprawling metropolis. Rome isn't just a city, it's a juggernaut of trade and commerce, fueled by the sweat and toil of countless slaves. Ah yes, the dirty little secret of Roman prosperity. Slave labor is the engine, the hidden force that keeps this empire running. They're the ones who ensure your toga is spotless, your bread is baked, and your city is, well, as clean as it's going to get. Estimates suggest there are over 300,000 slaves in Rome alone. That's nearly a third of the population, for those keeping score at home. And it's not just menial labor. Slaves are your accountants, your business managers, even your educators. It's a system that allows you, the Roman senator, to indulge in philosophical debates rather than worry about the day-to-day grind. But don't let the romantic notion of marble columns and grand forums fool you. The cost of living in this ancient metropolis is no small matter. Rent for a modest insula, those multi-story apartment buildings that could make modern real estate look like a bargain, can eat up a significant portion of a plebeian's income. Food prices fluctuate with the harvests. Grain is imported from Egypt at great expense to keep the populace fed and, more importantly, placated. Bread and circuses, as they say. It's a delicate balance, and if the scales tip too far, you might find yourself facing an angry mob instead of a cheering crowd. As you weave through the streets, dodging the occasional litter and the less occasional beggar, you can't help but notice the vibrant tapestry of Roman life. Merchants hawk their wares, from exotic spices to the finest silks, a testament to Rome's reach across the known world. But watch your step. Those open sewers are as much a part of the city as the aqueducts that bring fresh water. Soon enough, you arrive at the Curia Julia, the Senate House, where the true games begin. Forget gladiators. The political arena can be far bloodier. Inside, you're greeted by a cacophony of voices, senators gathered in clusters, each group a microcosm of intrigue. It's like a high-stakes game of chess, with alliances forming and fracturing before your eyes. You nod to Gaius, who's been eyeing the military reform bill like a hawk. He's lobbying for a more professional army, while others argue the cost could bankrupt the treasury. The debate is heated, and it's your job to navigate these turbulent waters without alienating potential allies. Lunch is a casual affair, a far cry from the opulence of banquets you might host at home. You settle in with a few colleagues in a nearby taberna, a place where deals are sealed over a simple meal of bread, cheese, and garum, a fish sauce that's more popular than it probably should be. It's here, away from the formalities of the Senate, that real decisions are often made. Perhaps you'll discuss the grain supply, critical as it is to maintaining peace in the city, or maybe the latest whispers of unrest in the provinces. You get the sense that some senators are more interested in their own gain than in the welfare of Rome. But that's politics for you, eternal, unchanging, and endlessly fascinating. And just like that, you're back in the Senate, ready to cast your vote on the day's legislation. Remember, every decision you make ripples through Rome like a stone tossed in a pond. The balance of power is delicate, and it's your duty to keep it from tipping into chaos. As you take your seat, you're acutely aware of the eyes upon you. Some are allies, others rivals, all united by a single purpose: to steer Rome towards a future that's as glorious as its past. But that's a story for tomorrow, when the sun will rise again over the eternal city, and you'll don your toga once more, ready to play your part in the grand spectacle. As you settle into your seat in the Senate, the anticipation crackles in the air like an impending thunderstorm. Welcome to the circus of Roman politics, where the stakes are high and the players are larger than life. It's 50 BC, and the political landscape is a minefield, ready to explode at the slightest misstep. The shadow of Julius Caesar looms large, like a colossus overshadowing the city. On the opposite side, Pompey the Great stands as a formidable force, each man a titan in his own right, their ambitions too vast for one republic to contain. You might think that being a senator in such times is all about glory and power. Spoiler alert, it's more akin to a game of survival, where the rules are constantly shifting and the consequences of failure are dire. The Senate is a hotbed of factions, primarily divided between the populars and the optimates. The populars, with their charismatic champion Caesar, advocate for the people. At least, that's the sales pitch. It's more about leveraging popular support to consolidate personal power. The optimates, with figures like Cicero and Cato the Younger among their ranks, cling to the traditional oligarchic control, aiming to preserve the status quo. Spoiler. It's less about ideology and more about who gets to keep their power and privilege. To truly understand the Senate's dynamics, consider the numbers. Rome's Senate is a body of around 300 men, though this can vary because, in politics, nothing is ever straightforward. Each senator is a bundle of ambitions, alliances, and agendas, a veritable cocktail of human nature. The Senate floor is where alliances are made and reputations dismantled. It's less a forum for reasoned debate and more a gladiatorial arena for verbal sparring. The stakes, control of the Roman world, no less. The day's session kicks off with a debate over military reform. Gaius is pushing for a professional standing army, a move that would shift power from the Senate to generals like Caesar and Pompey. It's a classic populars play: strengthen the military, and you strengthen the hand of those who command it. The optimates counter with concerns about cost and control, arguing that a professional army could become a tool for tyranny. It's a compelling argument, especially for those who fear another Sulla, a dictator who once marched his legions on Rome itself, setting a dangerous precedent. As the debate rages, you glance around at your fellow senators, each one a potential ally or rival. There's Cicero, the silver-tongued orator whose speeches can sway the masses and the Senate alike. His loyalty to the Republic is unquestionable, but his penchant for idealism often clashes with the more pragmatic members. Then there's Cato the Younger, a paragon of stoic virtue whose rigid adherence to principle often makes compromise a dirty word. In a room filled with shrewd political operators, Cato's inflexibility is both a strength and a liability. As the debate over military reform reaches a crescendo, it's clear that no resolution will be reached today. Like much in Roman politics, the discussions are often a matter of postponing decisions rather than making them. But that's not to say the day is wasted. Every speech, every vote, is an opportunity to gauge the winds of change. Who's aligning with whom? Which way are the loyalties shifting? It's a dance as old as Rome itself, a political ballet where the consequences are as real as they are deadly. Now, let's bust a myth. The romanticized notion that the Senate is a beacon of reasoned discourse, a paragon of democratic ideals. The reality, it's a cauldron of egos and ambitions where the ideal of public service often takes a backseat to personal advancement. Decisions are made not just in the curia, but in the shadowy corridors and private villas where deals are struck away from prying eyes. It's politics, Roman style, where the line between public duty and personal gain is as blurred as the toga-clad figures moving through the forum. As the session winds down, you find yourself pondering the broader implications of today's debates. The power struggle between Caesar and Pompey is more than just a clash of titans. It's a symptom of a republic straining at its seams. The delicate balance of power is shifting, and you're standing at the epicenter, trying to navigate the shifting sands without losing your footing. It's thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. With the formalities concluded, you step out of the Senate House into the late afternoon sun, your mind buzzing with the day's events. You've survived another day in the political arena, but the wheels of Roman politics never stop turning. Outside, the city beats on, indifferent to the machinations within its marble walls. The streets are alive with the chatter of citizens and the cries of vendors hawking their wares, a living testament to the vibrancy and complexity of Roman life. You head to a nearby taberna, a modest establishment where senators often gather to unwind and strategize over a cup of watered wine. Here, away from the formalities of the Senate, the conversation flows freely, and the true nature of alliances is often revealed. As you sip your wine, you listen to the buzz of conversation, each snippet a piece of the political puzzle you're trying to assemble. The topic at hand is the grain supply, a perennial concern in a city where bread is both a staple and a political tool. Grain prices are a barometer of public sentiment, and a shortage could lead to unrest. It's a delicate balancing act, one that keeps the Senate on edge. As you discuss potential solutions, you're acutely aware that the wrong move could tip the balance, leading to chaos in the streets. As the day fades into evening, you make your way back to your villa, the events of the day swirling in your mind. You've navigated another day in the life of a Roman senator, a role that's as much about survival as it is about governance. The political landscape is a treacherous one, filled with pitfalls and opportunities alike. But for now, you've emerged unscathed, ready to face tomorrow's challenges with the same blend of caution and ambition that defines the Roman spirit. And as the sun sets over the eternal city, casting a golden glow over its ancient streets, you find a moment of peace amidst the chaos. You're a part of something greater, a player in the grand spectacle of history. The Republic may be fraught with tension, but within its walls lies the promise of a future as glorious as its past. With that thought, you retire for the night, ready to don your toga once more at the break of dawn. The game of Roman politics is far from over, and tomorrow the Senate will gather again to shape the destiny of an empire. As the sun dips lower in the sky, casting long shadows across Rome's bustling streets, you find yourself ready to trade the political battlefield for the steamy, gossip-filled oasis of the Roman public baths. It's a transition as smooth as a gladiator's winning blow, yet just as strategic. After all, these baths are less about cleanliness and more about the art of networking. The baths are a bustling hub of Roman society, a place where the political elite rubs shoulders with the everyman. Imagine a modern coffee shop, gym, and boardroom all rolled into one, minus the Wi-Fi and lattes. The baths of Caracalla, one of the grandest in the city, could accommodate up to 1,600 visitors at once, making it the perfect venue for a senator to soak in the latest rumors and plot his next political move. Entry might only cost a quadrans, the smallest Roman coin, but the real price of admission is your willingness to engage in the social theatre around you. As you enter, the cacophony of voices bounces off the marble walls, a blend of philosophical debates and the latest scandalous whispers. The air is thick with steam and intrigue, not exactly what one imagines when picturing ancient leisure, but who said power brokering was always glamorous. You strip down and don the standard issue bathing attire, because let's face it, even a senator can't avoid the fashion faux pas of a toga in a tepidarium. Inside, the water is warm and the gossip warmer. You spot Lucius Cornelius, a fellow senator who's been eyeing a seat on the Military Oversight Committee. He's in deep conversation with a pair of equestrians, Rome's business elite, whose support could be pivotal. You casually drift over, because in Roman politics, as in comedy, timing and proximity is everything. This setting is tailor-made for the art of the indirect approach. You can discuss the grain supply crisis or the latest military reform bill, all under the guise of casual banter. The bathhouse is the ultimate venue for diplomacy, where deals are made without the formality of the Senate or the prying eyes of the public. It's no wonder that even emperors frequent these steamy halls, seeking to hear what's said when tongues are loosened by heat. After a good soak and an even better chat, it's time to move to the cooler frigidarium, a place to refresh both body and mind. But don't get too comfortable. The real work begins at the evening symposium, where philosophical ideas and political strategies are dissected with the same precision as a Roman surgeon's scalpel. You head there next, perhaps with a quick stop at home to swap your bath attire for a more respectable tunic. A symposium isn't just about wine and cheese, though those are definitely on the menu. It's a gathering of minds, where philosophical discourse flows as freely as the vintage Falanian. Tonight's gathering is at the villa of one Marcus Terentius Varro, a man whose knowledge of philosophy is rivaled only by his impressive wine cellar. The symposium rivals the Senate as a venue for influence. Here, the debates can range from the Stoic ideals of Zeno to the pragmatic policies of Cato. It's a place where a well-timed comment can elevate your standing or, if poorly judged, leave you as flat as day-old bread. You listen as Varro himself expounds on the virtues of Epicureanism, a philosophy that emphasizes simple pleasures and the pursuit of knowledge. It's an attractive idea, especially for those weary of Rome's political machinations, but let's not kid ourselves. Simplifying life is a luxury not afforded to the politically ambitious. Philosophy in Rome isn't just an academic exercise. It's a tool, a way to frame and justify political agendas. Whether it's the stoic endurance of Cato or the populist leanings of Caesar, philosophy provides a veneer of respectability to what is often a ruthless quest for power. You make a note of who nods along with Varro and who rolls their eyes, because even in high-minded discussions, alliances are formed and futures decided. As the evening progresses, the conversation inevitably shifts to more immediate concerns: alliances, legislation, and the ever-looming threat of unrest. Wine loosens tongues, and soon enough, the air buzzes with talk of the latest Senate maneuvers and the shifting loyalties of key players. You can almost see the calculations dancing in the eyes of your fellow senators, each trying to decipher who will rise and who will fall in the ever-turning wheel of Roman power. And here's a myth to bust: the notion that these gatherings are purely about intellectual engagement. Oh, how charmingly naive. The symposium is a chessboard where every move counts. It's less about the pursuit of truth and more about the pursuit of advantage. Underneath the veneer of cultured debate lies a raw, unyielding drive for political survival. As the night wears on, you find yourself playing the game as well, weaving through conversations with the deftness of a seasoned orator. You discuss everything from the potential of the latest military recruitments to the implications of the latest omens read by the city's augurs. Every topic, every laugh, is a thread in the intricate tapestry of Roman life, where personal and political fortunes are inextricably linked. With the symposium winding down, you make your way home, the cool night air a welcome relief after the warmth of the villa. The streets are quieter now, the chaos of the day replaced by the gentle hum of a city at rest. You reflect on the day's events, the deals struck, and the alliances formed. In Rome, the day never truly ends. It merely pauses, waiting for the sun to rise and the game to begin anew. As you approach your villa, you're reminded once more of the delicate balance you maintain. Networking, patronage, and philosophical debate. These aren't just pastimes for a Roman senator. They're essential tools in the never-ending quest for power and influence. It's a world where every word, every gesture, holds meaning, and where the line between friend and foe is as thin as the thread in your toga. You retire for the night, your mind buzzing with the possibilities of tomorrow. The world of Roman politics is a thrilling, perilous place, but it's also where you belong. As you drift off to sleep, you know that when morning comes, you'll be ready to don your toga once more, to step back into the arena and play the game with all the cunning and courage the Republic demands. Because in the end, it's not just about survival. It's about shaping the destiny of an empire, one bathhouse rumor and symposium debate at a time. As you drift off to sleep, dreaming of tomorrow's political maneuvers, the scent of roasted dormice and honeyed wine lures you back to consciousness. It's time for the grand finale of your day, the cena, a Roman dinner party that's as much about politics as it is about pleasure. Think of it as the original power dinner, only with more reclining and fewer utensils. Your villa, lit by the warm glow of oil lamps, is transformed into a stage where the evening's drama will unfold. The cena isn't just a meal. It's a spectacle, a chance to flex your social muscles and reinforce your standing among Rome's elite. The guest list is a who's who of Roman society: fellow senators, influential equestrians, a philosopher or two for good measure, and perhaps even a visiting dignitary from a far-flung province. Each one is here not just for the food, but for the political currency that flows as freely as the wine. Now, let's talk logistics. Hosting a cena is no small feat. Your slaves have been working tirelessly, preparing the triclinium, the dining room where guests will recline on couches positioned around a central table. It's a setup that encourages conversation, or at least the kind of banter that can lead to alliances. The meal itself is a three-act play, starting with the gustatio, or appetizers, followed by the main course and finally dessert. Tonight's menu includes everything from peacock and wild boar to the more humble lentils and chickpeas, a nod to the mixed company you keep. In Rome, food isn't just sustenance, it's a status symbol, a way to demonstrate your wealth and sophistication. As your guests arrive, each one is greeted with a choice of wine, Falanian for the connoisseurs, and something a bit more pedestrian for those of less discerning palates. The dining room buzzes with conversation, each word a subtle dance of politics and power. You take your place at the head of the table, your role as host demanding both charm and cunning. And here's a fun fact. The average Roman senator consumes about 3 pints of wine per cena. It's a social lubricant, sure, but also a test of endurance. Hold your wine well, and you might hold your power longer too. As the meal progresses, the conversation drifts from the day's Senate debates to the latest gossip from the forum. There's talk of a new alliance forming between 2 powerful families, a marriage pact that could shift the balance of power. You nod along, knife in hand, expertly peeling a fig as you weigh the implications. In Rome, alliances aren't sealed with contracts, but with promises and shared interests. And tonight's cena is fertile ground for such negotiations. One of your guests, a senator known for his wit and sharp tongue, regales the table with tales of his latest oratorical triumph in the Curia. The others listen intently, their laughter punctuating the air like the crackle of a bonfire. It's moments like these that reveal the true nature of Roman politics, a game of charisma as much as strategy, where the best story often wins. And speaking of stories, let's bust a myth. The idea that these dinner parties are all about indulgence and excess. Sure, there's plenty of that. More than one senator has been known to overindulge and find himself face down in a platter of roasted hare. But beneath the decadence lies the hard reality of political survival. Every toast is a test, every jest a judgment. In Rome, the cena is a microcosm of society, a reflection of the Republic's complexities and contradictions. As the meal draws to a close, the final course is served. It's a delicate affair of honey cakes and fruit, a sweet end to an evening of strategic play. The guests begin to drift out, some with new alliances, others with food for thought. You walk a few to the door, exchanging pleasantries and promises that may, or may not, be kept come morning. With the villa finally quiet, you retire to your private quarters, the weight of the day settling on your shoulders like a heavy cloak. You've navigated the day's challenges, from the Senate floor to the dinner table, yet the future remains uncertain. Rome is a city of perpetual motion, where power shifts as easily as the Tiber's currents. One day you're hosting the city's elite. The next, you could find yourself on the wrong side of history. In the dim light of your chamber, you reflect on the pressures of maintaining power in such a volatile world. The Republic is a fickle beast, full of triumphs and treacheries, where today's ally is tomorrow's adversary. Yet amidst the chaos, there's a certain allure. The chance to shape the destiny of an empire, to leave a legacy that endures long after the last lamp has burned out. It's a seductive promise, one that keeps you, and Rome, forever striving, forever dreaming. As you lay down, you ponder the legacy you'll leave behind. Is it one of power, of influence, or perhaps something more enduring? The Romans have a saying, Fama semper vivat, may fame live forever. In a city obsessed with legacy, the true measure of a life lies not in the titles won or the wealth amassed, but in the stories told by those who remain. And so, with a final sigh, you close your eyes, ready to embrace the challenges of another day. The eternal city waits for no one, and when dawn breaks, you'll rise once more to don your toga, to play your part in the grand spectacle of Roman life. Because in the end, it's not just about surviving. It's about thriving in a world where every day is a new opportunity to shape the future and etch your name into the annals of history. Rome around 100 CE was a city that could make any modern metropolis look like a sleepy village. Picture a place where over 1 million people lived cheek by jowl, where the noise never stopped, and the streets were a chaotic dance of merchants, soldiers, and the occasional philosopher. If you think New York City is the city that never sleeps, Then Rome was the original insomniac. The empire stretched from Britain to Egypt, like a giant Mediterranean octopus with its tentacles wrapped around the known world. And at the heart of this beast was Rome, a city that thrived on opulence and excess. The social structure of Rome was a bit like a very exclusive club, and not everyone got the invite. At the top you had the patricians, the elite, the bigwigs, the ones with all the money and power. They lived in sprawling villas, wore togas that cost more than most people earned in a year, and threw feasts that could feed a small army. Then there were the plebeians, the common folk who made up the majority of the population. They hustled for a living, squeezed into cramped apartments, and spent a lot of their time trying not to get trampled in the forum. Now, this wasn't just a simple case of the haves and the have-nots. The patricians weren't just wealthy, they were the gatekeepers of power. They controlled the Senate, they commanded the legions, and they made decisions that affected the entire empire. The plebeians, on the other hand, were the backbone of Rome. They were the farmers, the labourers, the tradespeople who kept the city running. But despite their numbers, they had very little say in how things were run. The divide wasn't just economic, it was political, social, and cultural. Speaking of economics, let's talk about the Roman economy. It was like the ancient world's version of globalization. The empire's trade routes were the veins and arteries that kept Rome's heart beating. From the far reaches of Britain came tin, from the sands of Egypt came grain, and from the lush lands of Gaul came wine. All roads led to Rome, quite literally, since the Romans were fanatics about building roads. They constructed over 50,000 miles of them, all leading to the capital, making them the original highway kings. The cost of goods varied wildly depending on where you were in the empire. In Rome, you could get a loaf of bread for about a sestertius, which was a small silver coin. But if you were a Roman out in the provinces, you'd probably pay double or triple that. This was a city where the rich could afford delicacies like peacock tongues and dormice stuffed with nuts, while the poor were lucky to have a bowl of porridge. And then there were the feasts. Oh, the feasts. A Roman banquet wasn't just a meal. It was a status symbol, a power play, and sometimes a political maneuver. A successful feast could elevate your social standing faster than you could say, pass the garum. That's fish sauce, by the way, and the Romans were obsessed with it. These banquets were often held in tricliniums, the Roman dining rooms, where guests reclined on couches and indulged in everything from lamb to exotic fruits imported from far-flung corners of the empire. These feasts were a microcosm of Roman society, where you could see the social hierarchy laid out in the seating arrangements. The most important guests got the best spots, closest to the host, while the less important ones were relegated to the outer edges. It was like sitting at the kids' table during Thanksgiving, but with more wine and less cranberry sauce. So, why did these feasts matter? Well, they were a way for the elite to flex their wealth and influence. Hosting a successful banquet could win you friends and allies, and in a city as politically charged as Rome, that was worth its weight in gold. Plus, in a culture that prized excess and indulgence, throwing a feast was a way to show that you were living your best life. It was the ultimate expression of Roman opulence, a testament to the empire's reach and power. In the grand scheme of things, the Roman feast was more than just a meal. It was a reflection of the city's social structure, economic prowess, and political machinations. It was a glimpse into the lives of the elite, a taste of the luxury that defined the era. And as we dive deeper into the world of Roman feasts, we'll see that these banquets were as much about politics and power as they were about food and drink. So grab your toga and prepare for a journey into the heart of ancient Rome, where the feasts were legendary and the stories behind them even more so. And so, as we dive into the heart of these legendary Roman feasts, let's set the scene with the guest list and seating arrangements, which would make a red carpet event look like a backyard barbecue. At the pinnacle of this gastronomic pyramid sat the host, the paterfamilias, whose main job was to impress, flatter, and occasionally intimidate. A Roman feast was his chance to showcase wealth, influence, and the kind of culinary flair that would make Gordon Ramsay lose his cool. Now, who got to share in this decadent display? The guest list was a who's who of Roman society, and the seating was a tactical game of social chess. Picture it. The triclinium, or dining room, was designed with 3 couches arranged in a U-shape, each couch accommodating 3 guests. 9 was the magic number, a nod to the mystical and a practical size for conversation without shouting over a crowd. The most coveted spot was the lectus medius, the middle couch, where the most influential guests reclined. Think of it as the VIP section with the best view of the host, who occupied the place of honor. The host, always prepared to play the role of both politician and Epicurean, knew that where you sat could be as important as what you ate. A seat on the lectus medius was a sign of favor or recognition, while those shuffled to the outer lectus emus might as well be dining in the kitchen. This wasn't just about dinner, it was social maneuvering at its finest. A well-placed word, a shared toast, or a conspiratorial whisper could sway decisions that rippled through the Senate or the city. Each guest played a role, consciously or not, in the drama of the evening. Senators, generals, influential merchants, and occasionally poets or philosophers all brought their agendas to the table. Even the entertainers, who provided music, dance, or recitations of epic poetry, were carefully chosen to reflect the host's taste and the evening's tone. A good host knew that while the food and wine might draw the guests, the real feast was in the alliances forged and rivalries kindled. Now let's talk attire. The toga was Rome's answer to the power suit, an elaborate woolen garment that signaled your status without a word. But not all togas were created equal. The toga praetexta, adorned with a purple stripe, was the mark of high-ranking officials, while the plain toga virilis was for the everyman. A feast was a chance to flaunt your finest, and yes, there were unwritten rules. Showing up in a toga that was too flamboyant, or, heaven forbid, dirty, was a faux pas that could see you eating alone. Beneath the glamour of the toga, however, lurked the gritty reality of Rome's class divide. While the patricians reclined in luxury, plebeians might find themselves attending as servants, ensuring the wine flowed and plates remained full. These feasts were microcosms of the larger political game, a stage where alliances were brokered over banter about the latest chariot race or the quality of the olive oil. And let's bust a myth while we're at it. The image of the Roman feast as a hedonistic bacchanalia is more Hollywood than history. Sure, there were moments of indulgence. Wine flowed like the Tiber on a rainy day, and exotic dishes vied for attention. But these gatherings were governed by a structured chaos that mirrored the Roman world itself. There were rules to this game of excess, a choreography of power and politeness that kept the wheels of society turning. In reality, the more orgiastic depictions of Roman dining often came from the pens of the moralistic elite, eager to warn against the decadence that could unravel the social fabric. In truth, the feasts were less about debauchery and more about the subtle dance of influence and ambition. The true excess was in the political maneuvering as much as the food. It was about knowing which senator preferred his dormice with honey and who could be swayed by a particularly fine vintage of Falernian wine. So, as we explore the seats of power at these sumptuous affairs, remember that every bite was a statement, every sip a potential pact. The dining room was a battlefield where the weapons were words, and the spoils were alliances that could change the course of the empire. In this world of carefully curated chaos, the Roman feast was both a testament to the might of Rome and a reminder of its fragility. And as we continue our journey through these ancient banquets, we'll uncover more about the tantalizing intersection of food, fun, and the fierce politics that made Rome the empire it was. As the echoes of political whispers and the clinking of goblets filled the triclinium, let's shift our focus from the social to the culinary, a world where Rome's appetite for novelty was as insatiable as its hunger for power. The Roman feast was an epic tale told in courses, beginning with appetizers that served as the opening act. Forget your humble cheese plate. Roman starters were a gastronomic tour of the empire. Imagine a platter showcasing olives from Hispania, oysters from Britannia, and honey-glazed dormice from Gaul. Yes, dormice, tiny rodents that, believe it or not, were considered a delicacy. If you're grimacing at the thought, remember that taste is a cultural construct. Future foodies may well cringe at our love for kale smoothies. Before we dive into the main courses, let's talk about garum, the Roman condiment that could put modern hot sauce to shame. This fermented fish sauce was the ketchup of the ancient world, but with a whiff that could clear a room. Crafted from the innards of fish left to stew in the sun, garum was the secret ingredient that added umami to everything from bread to boar. While it sounds like a dare gone wrong, it was a staple across social strata. A jar of the finest garum could set you back 1,000 sestertii, a small fortune, yet it was as common on Roman tables as Wi-Fi is at a Starbucks today. Moving on to the main course, the Roman palate was a testament to their empire's reach. Exotic meats like ostrich and flamingo might have graced the table, each bite a status symbol rather than a culinary delight. These birds were imported from Africa, their costs soaring higher than their wings ever could. Flamingo tongues were particularly prized, served in elaborate dishes that showcased not only the chef's skill, but also the host's wealth. And while these dishes sound like the fever dream of a food critic with a penchant for the absurd, they were very much real and very much expensive. But it wasn't all about flaunting opulence. The Romans were nothing if not practical, and their love for pork was as grounded as their road-building ambitions. Pigs were the livestock of choice, providing everything from sausages to succulent roasts. A single pig could feed a banquet, its versatility unmatched in the culinary world. And let's not forget fish. The Mediterranean was Rome's seafood buffet, with mullet and sea bass making regular appearances on the menu. These were often served with sauces that combined local herbs with spices from the east, a nod to Rome's vast trade network. Now, before you think every Roman feast was a display of culinary one-upmanship, let's bust another myth. Not every meal was an extravagant affair. For many, especially the plebeians, a feast was an occasional indulgence, not a nightly ritual. The idea that Romans lived in a constant state of gluttony is more fantasy than fact. Sure, the elite indulged, but for the average Joe, or Julius, it was more about sustenance than spectacle. No Roman feast would be complete without discussing dessert, the sweet finale that left guests with a lingering taste of the host's generosity. Fresh fruits like figs, grapes, and pomegranates were common, their flavors a testament to the fertile lands of the empire. Honey, the ancient world's answer to sugar, sweetened everything from cakes to nuts. And then there were the surprises, like dates stuffed with nuts or pastry filled with cheese, treats that turned the end of the meal into its own spectacle. But let's not forget the drink that washed it all down. Wine, the lifeblood of any Roman gathering. Roman wine culture was as sophisticated as it was widespread. Vintages from Falernian vineyards were particularly revered, their prices reflecting their prestige. A single amphora might cost 100 denarii, equivalent to a soldier's monthly wage. But for the Romans, wine was more than just a drink. It was a social lubricant, a conversation starter, and occasionally a philosophical muse. Diluted with water, because only barbarians drank it neat, wine was consumed throughout the meal, each sip a reminder of Rome's vinous dominance. And there you have it, a Roman feast in all its glory. A celebration of empire, an exhibition of excess, and a testament to the culinary creativity and resources at Rome's disposal. It was a reflection of the times, a blend of tradition and innovation, of local flavors and exotic imports. These meals were as much about the stories they told as the food they served. As we wrap up this course of our historical feast, keep in mind that while the Romans loved their indulgences, they were also masterful at keeping appearances. Behind every dish lay a story, behind every ingredient, a journey. The Roman table was a stage where history played out in flavors and textures, a tapestry woven with the threads of conquest, trade, and tradition. As we continue to unearth the layers of Roman dining, remember that every meal was an opportunity, a chance to impress, to connect, and sometimes to scheme. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the world of Roman feasts, where political intrigue and culinary artistry often shared the same table. Now that our plates have been cleared, and our wine goblets refilled, let's shift our gaze from the culinary to the cultural. Time to talk entertainment. In Rome, a feast without entertainment was like a toga without a stripe. Technically functional but utterly lacking flair. These gatherings were about more than just satisfying appetites. They were a full-on sensory assault designed to dazzle and impress. Enter the entertainers, the unsung heroes of Roman banquets. Imagine a scene where poets, acrobats, musicians, and dancers converge to create a spectacle worthy of the emperor himself. These weren't just hired hands. They were the social media influencers of their day, each performance a tweet, a post, a story that spoke volumes about the host's taste and wealth. Let's start with the poets. If you thought slam poetry was a modern invention, think again. Roman poets were the rock stars of the ancient world, spinning verses that could make or break an event. A well-timed recitation of Virgil or Ovid might uplift the occasion, or, if poorly delivered, condemn it to whispers and snickers. These performances were often accompanied by a lyre or a flute, adding a musical backdrop to the lyrical gymnastics. The cost? Well, let's just say a top poet's fee could rival a year's salary for a laborer, proof that words, even then, had weight. Then there were the acrobats and dancers, the Cirque du Soleil of antiquity, flipping and twirling their way through the dining room. Their acts could range from the elegantly graceful to the jaw-droppingly dangerous, depending on the host's inclination and budget. Hiring a troupe wasn't cheap. A skilled acrobat could command a few hundred sestertii per performance, a small investment for a big impression. Musicians, too, played their part, often forming small ensembles that provided a constant soundtrack to the evening's events. The Roman equivalent of elevator music, but with a bit more pizzazz. Harps, flutes, and even hydraules, an early version of the organ, were common, each note designed to soothe, inspire, or excite. And let's not forget the dancers, who, with their elaborate costumes and complex choreography, brought a touch of the exotic to the proceedings. These performers were often slaves or freedmen, their artistry a testament to the empire's cultural melting pot. But it wasn't just about the spectacle. Entertainment at a Roman feast was a layered affair, a theatrical performance where each act was carefully curated to reflect the host's aspirations and social standing. The more lavish the entertainment, the more powerful the statement of wealth and influence. It was a chance for the host to flaunt connections, not just to the performers, but to the broader cultural world they represented. Now, let's address the myth of the endless Roman revelry. While it's tempting to imagine these feasts as non-stop parties, the reality was more structured than a modern-day wedding planner's itinerary. Entertainment followed a choreographed sequence, with each act serving a purpose. A comedic interlude might follow a heavy course, lightening the mood before the next serious discussion. An epic poem could provide a backdrop to political conversations, the meter and rhyme offering a rhythmic counterpoint to political machinations. Economically, these performances were a microcosm of Rome's broader financial landscape. The fees paid to entertainers fueled a thriving service industry, one that highlighted the stark class differences of the time. While patrons enjoyed the show from their cushioned couches, performers often lived on the fringes, their fates tied to the whims of their employers. Yet, for many, the opportunity to perform at a high-profile banquet was a chance to ascend the social ladder, however briefly. Beyond the economics, the cultural significance of these performances was undeniable. In a world where literacy was limited to the elite, oral storytelling and performance were vital in shaping public perception and preserving cultural heritage. A well-executed poem or a stirring dance could convey complex ideas and emotions, weaving narratives that resonated long after the feast had ended. As the night wore on, the entertainment often mirrored the host's ambitions. A senator hoping to curry favor might commission a play that subtly endorsed his policies, while a merchant seeking new trade routes could showcase exotic dancers, hinting at the wonders his ventures could bring. This wasn't just dinner. It was diplomacy, art, and theater, all rolled into one sumptuous package. What we see here is the quintessential Roman blend of form and function, where even the entertainment was a tool of influence and a testament to the empire's reach. It wasn't about endless indulgence, but rather a carefully orchestrated performance where every element served a purpose. So, next time you picture a Roman feast, imagine it as a grand stage, where every act, every performance, was a piece of a larger narrative, a narrative that told the story of Rome's power, its cultural depth, and its unyielding pursuit of greatness. As we prepare to delve into the final chapters of our feast, keep these images in mind. The poet's words echoing through the triclinium, the dancer's shadow flitting across marble walls, the acrobat's leap frozen in time. Each a reminder that in ancient Rome, every moment was a chance to shine, to sway, and to leave a mark on the ever-turning wheel of history. Stay tuned, because the story's not over yet. As the last notes of music faded and the final toast was raised, the end of a Roman feast was anything but a simple good night, and a stagger through the door. No, the aftermath of these extravagant affairs was a veritable social minefield, where reputations could rise or fall as easily as a poorly balanced amphora. The guests, now well fueled by Falernian wine, would depart into the Roman night, but the real work was just beginning. For the host, this was the moment of reckoning, where the success of the evening could cement alliances or unravel them faster than a toga in a windstorm. So, what happened once the last guest reluctantly rose from the triclinium couch? For the host, the post-feast phase was akin to a modern-day political debrief. Couriers might be dispatched with follow-up notes or gifts, ensuring the evening's bonds were not just formed but fortified. The cost of these gestures could be eye-watering. Gifting a rare amphora of wine or a valuable trinket wasn't uncommon, setting back a host by hundreds of sestertii. And let's not overlook the behind-the-scenes cleanup, where servants and slaves would labor late into the night, restoring the villa to its pristine state. It's the ancient Roman version of Uber Eats and a cleaning service rolled into one, but without the convenience or choice. The political implications of these feasts were as rich as the dishes served. A successful banquet could bolster a host's standing, earning him the goodwill of senators, generals, or influential merchants. In a city where power was more fluid than a goblet of undiluted wine, these connections were worth their weight in gold. A poorly executed feast, on the other hand, could spell disaster, leaving the host to stew in the social equivalent of cold porridge. Think of it as a political campaign where the voters are evaluating your ability to entertain, influence, and occasionally flatter. This delicate dance of diplomacy wasn't lost on the Romans. They understood that a single evening could reshape alliances or sow the seeds of rivalry. The stakes were high, and the rewards even higher. A well-placed compliment or a shared laugh over a roasted dormouse could secure a trade deal, a military alliance, or even a marriage contract. It was networking with a side of garum, where every course was a step in the choreography of power. Now, let's take a step back and consider the legacy of these feasts in today's world. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and you might notice that the echoes of Roman banquets can still be heard in our modern social gatherings. From state dinners to lavish weddings, the spirit of the Roman feast lives on, albeit with less reliance on stuffed dormice and more on Instagrammable appetizers. The idea of using food as a social lubricant, a means to forge connections and share ideas, is as relevant now as it was in ancient Rome. Consider the modern dinner party, a stage where hosts showcase their culinary prowess and social acumen. It's a carefully curated event where every detail, from the playlist to the centerpiece, is designed to impress. Sound familiar? The Romans would have approved, though they might raise an eyebrow at our lack of garum. The political maneuvering may have shifted from the Senate to the boardroom, but the underlying dynamics remain. Whether it's a Michelin-starred chef's tasting menu or a backyard barbecue, the principles of hospitality, influence, and connection endure. And speaking of connections, what would a Roman feast look like in the age of Instagram? Imagine the paterfamilias as an influencer, his villa a carefully curated backdrop for a series of stories and posts. The triclinium would be awash in the glow of smartphones, each course meticulously photographed before a single bite was taken. Hash garum glam might trend, while selfies with poets or acrobats would flood the feed. The guest list would be a who's who of social media elite, their every move documented for the digital world to see. In this brave new world, the political implications would be as immediate as they were timeless. A well-received post could elevate a host's status, while a social media faux pas might send them spiraling into obscurity. The pressure to perform, to entertain, to connect would be magnified with the eyes of the world watching. In many ways, it's not so different from ancient Rome, where the stakes were high and the rewards even higher. As we draw the curtain on our exploration of Roman feasts, let's savor the lessons of history. These gatherings were more than just meals. They were microcosms of an empire, reflections of its culture, politics, and ambitions. They remind us that while times may change, the complexities of human interaction remain. Whether in a triclinium or a modern dining room, the art of the feast continues to shape our world. So, the next time you find yourself at a social gathering, remember the Romans and their penchant for turning meals into masterpieces. Embrace the connections, savor the conversations, and perhaps, just perhaps, raise a glass to the echoes of history that linger long after the last course is served. In the end, whether reclining on couches or scrolling through feeds, we're all part of a grand banquet, a testament to the enduring power of food, friendship, and the art of the feast. Your eyes flutter open to the hazy dawn filtering through gaps in the thatched roof, and the first thing you notice is the unmistakable scent of, well, smoke. Welcome to Viking life. You've just woken up in a Longhouse, the beating heart of a Norse homestead, where the smell of burning wood is as much a part of your morning routine as coffee is to us today. Let's paint a picture of your home, shall we? This isn't your typical cozy cottage. We're talking about a long, rectangular structure, roughly 20 to 30 meters long and 5 meters wide, built to withstand the Scandinavian elements. Think of it as a Viking version of an open-plan living space, but with more smoke and fewer scented candles. The Longhouse's wooden frame is constructed from sturdy oak beams, supported by vertical posts dug into the ground. It's practically a fortress against the harsh Nordic winds. The thatched roof, a hallmark of Viking architecture, is made from bundles of straw or reeds. It's surprisingly effective at keeping the rain out, though it does occasionally let in a bit of daylight, and unfortunately smoke. But hey, in a time before air conditioning, you take what you can get. And if you're thinking, why not just build a chimney? Well, that's a good question. The absence of chimneys meant all that smoke from the central hearth got trapped inside, providing a sort of passive heating system. Smoky, yes, but efficient in its own way. The interior of the Longhouse is a bustling hive of activity. During the day, it's filled with the clatter of tools and the chatter of families and labourers. At night, it transforms into a more restful space, though you're still likely to be sharing it with a dozen or so of your closest kin, and maybe a few animals. Viking longhouses weren't just for people. They were multifunctional spaces. Think of them as the original live work units, with livestock often housed in the back to share their warmth during the long, cold nights. Now, let's talk about the economics of this operation. Building a longhouse wasn't a weekend DIY project. The materials alone were a significant investment. Oak for the frames, thatch for the roof, and even the iron nails used in construction were all expensive commodities. Labor was another factor. Crafting a longhouse required skilled carpenters, who didn't come cheap. The time and resources required meant that longhouses were typically built by those with enough wealth and manpower to afford such a project. The longhouse wasn't just a home, it was a social and economic hub. It served as a meeting place, a workshop, and even a venue for feasts and ceremonies. It was central to the Viking community's way of life, a place where cultural and economic exchanges took place. Imagine it as the town square office, and your living room all wrapped into one. The longhouse was where deals were struck, alliances forged, and stories shared around the fire. It's easy to romanticize the Viking longhouse with its communal living and rustic charm, but life in these smoke-filled spaces was far from idyllic. The constant presence of smoke could be a health hazard. leading to respiratory problems. Privacy was a luxury few could afford, and personal space was practically non-existent. But the Longhouse was more than a building. It was a testament to Viking resourcefulness, a structure that embodied their resilience and adaptability. So, as you sit there, perhaps a bit bleary-eyed from the smoky morning air, take a moment to appreciate the ingenuity that went into your surroundings. The Longhouse is a reminder of a time when community was paramount, when homes were not just shelters, but vibrant centers of Viking life. And remember, next time you're tempted to complain about your modern housing woes, that at least you don't have to share your living room with a couple of cows. As you sit there, perhaps a bit bleary-eyed from the smoky morning air, take a moment to appreciate that the day is just getting started. You might be tempted to hit the snooze button, if such a thing existed in the 10th century, but Viking life waits for no one. Breakfast, such as it is, comes straight from the central hearth, the beating heart of the Longhouse. Forget your avocado toast. We're talking about something like a porridge, made from barley or oats, possibly sweetened with honey if you're lucky. It's simple, hearty fare designed to fuel a day of hard work. And speaking of work, let's dive into the daily grind, shall we? The romantic image of the Viking warrior, all muscle and bravado, is what Hollywood loves to sell. But in reality, most Vikings were far more familiar with a plough than a sword. The economic engine of Norse society wasn't raiding, it was agriculture. Sure, raiding got all the headlines, but farming was the bread and butter, quite literally. Now, don't think for a second that Viking farms were small-scale operations. Oh no, we're talking about serious business here. A typical Viking farm would include barley, oats, rye, and flax. Livestock like cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs were essential, providing not just food, but materials like wool and leather. Milking goats was a daily chore, and it was as much a part of life as checking your email is today. Every family member had their role. It was a well-oiled machine of human and animal labor. Gender roles, of course, were a big deal, and the women of the Longhouse were the unsung heroes of Viking society. They weren't just homemakers, they were powerhouses in their own right. Spinning wool, weaving textiles, managing the household economy, these tasks were as vital as any raid. Women could own property, initiate divorce, and even run businesses. In many ways, they held the keys to the kingdom when it came to domestic and economic life. Now, while the men might head out on trading expeditions or those far more glamorous raids, the women kept the home fires burning, quite literally. And let's not forget that the work didn't stop at the Longhouse door. Viking women were involved in everything from brewing ale to managing trade goods. Talk about multitasking. Ah, trade, the lifeblood of the Viking world. Those longships weren't just for pillaging. They were the cargo ships of their day, connecting Scandinavia with markets as far-flung as Byzantium and Baghdad. Forget Amazon Prime. Viking traders had something even better. The original Silk Road, only wetter. They carried timber, furs, and amber, returning with precious metals, exotic spices, and silk. The trade routes stretched from Constantinople to Greenland, a testament to the Vikings' prowess as international businessmen. The myth of the lone Viking warrior sailing off into the sunset with a dragon-headed ship. It's a compelling image, but the real story is of a complex society where trade and agriculture were king. The warrior ethos was important, sure, but it was the ability to grow crops and barter goods that truly kept the longship afloat. So, as you find yourself immersed in the rhythmic routine of Viking life, remember that the true power of this society wasn't just in its ability to conquer, but in its capacity to cultivate and connect. The Longhouse, with its smoky interior and bustling activity, was the beating heart of this world, a place where every chore, every meal, and every trade good contributed to the mighty saga of the Norse. Stay tuned, because the day is just beginning, and there's a whole world of Viking life waiting to be explored. As the day warms up and the smoke clears from the Longhouse, it's time to step outside into the bustling Viking village. Ah, fresh air. Feels good, doesn't it? Once you've shaken off that morning haze, you find yourself in the thick of Viking community life. The air is buzzing with the sounds of hammers on anvils, the chatter of traders, and the occasional shout from a child darting between the legs of busy adults. It's a scene that feels both chaotic and familiar, like a medieval farmer's market where everyone knows everyone. And yet, there's always something to buy or barter. Now, while we're out here, let's dive into the social and political fabric of this Norse world. You see, Vikings didn't just spend their time farming and raiding. They were also surprisingly adept at governance. Enter the Thing, not to be confused with that ominous creature from horror flicks. The Thing was the Viking assembly, a democratic forum where free men could voice their opinions and settle disputes. Picture it as a cross between a town hall meeting and a reality show reunion, where land disputes and inheritance issues were hashed out in front of the community. But hold your horned helmets, there's more to this than meets the eye. Yes, the Thing was democratic in the sense that it allowed for open debate and decision-making. However, let's not kid ourselves into thinking it was a proto-parliament. While every free man had a voice, not all voices were equal. Influential chieftains and clan leaders, often the wealthiest landowners, wielded most of the power. These guys were exactly the one-person, one-vote types. And don't forget women and slaves. They weren't even invited to the party. So while the Thing sounds like a progressive institution, it was more an oligarchy with democratic branding. Despite its flaws, the Thing was crucial for maintaining order in Viking society. It resolved everything from criminal cases to property laws, sometimes with a touch of the dramatic. Got a beef with your neighbor over grazing rights? Bring it to the Thing. Just don't expect a swift verdict. Cases could drag on for days, weeks even, and often involved a lot of shouting. Think of it as the original courtroom drama, but with more beards and fewer gavel bangs. Now, beyond the Thing, the social structure of Viking society was as layered as a well-made lasagna. At the top, you had the Jarls, chieftains who were the rock stars of their time. They controlled large swathes of land and commanded loyalty from followers, or housecarls, who were essentially Viking knights. Below them were the freemen, or Karls, who had rights and could own land but lacked the wealth and influence of the Jarls. And at the bottom you had the thralls, slaves who could be bought, sold, or freed, depending on the whims of their masters. The myth of the egalitarian Viking society is tempting, but reality bites harder. Wealth and lineage dictated your place in the pecking order, and mobility between classes was about as likely as a longship flying. Yet, for all its hierarchy, the Viking world prized personal honor and reputation above all else. A Jarl could be toppled if he lost the respect of his followers. Talk about a high-stakes popularity contest. Speaking of stakes, let's touch on the clan rivalries that ran beneath the surface of this seemingly orderly society. Blood feuds were a real thing, and they could last generations, tearing families and communities apart. Forget soap opera drama. Viking vendettas were the original long-running series. These feuds were often sparked by a perceived slight or a land dispute and could escalate into full-blown warfare. It was a world where your clan was your lifeline, and loyalty to kin mattered more than any allegiance to a distant king. And then there were the legal battles. If you thought modern lawsuits were drawn out, Viking legal proceedings could be an epic saga in their own right. Imagine standing in the middle of a field, the community gathered around, as you argue your case with passion and perhaps a dash of theatrical flair. You'd present your evidence, call upon witnesses, and hope the Thing ruled in your favor. If not, well, you might find yourself the target of a blood feud, which was the Viking version of a very hostile Yelp review. Yet, despite all this, the Thing and the social structures around it were vital for maintaining some semblance of order in a society that was as turbulent as the North Sea. It was a system that allowed for checks and balances, albeit in a form that was rough around the edges. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but it worked, for the most part. The Thing was where justice, or something like it, was dispensed, where alliances were forged, and where community ties were strengthened or shattered. As you stand there, soaking up the midday sun and the vibrant energy of Viking life, it's clear that this society was far more than just a bunch of seafaring warriors. It was a complex tapestry of power, politics, and human ambition, where the Thing played a central role. So, while the Hollywood version of the Viking world might be all about the battles and the glory, the real story is about community and governance, wrapped in a smoky cloak of tradition and rivalry. Stay tuned, because the Viking saga is far from over. There's more to unravel about this fascinating world where democracy met despotism, and the line between friend and foe was as fluid as the tides. As you let the afternoon sun warm your skin, you realize that Viking life wasn't all about governance and grudges. It was also rich with leisure and culture, a tapestry woven as intricately as a piece of Norse brocade. Forget Netflix marathons. Vikings had their own brand of entertainment, and it was something to behold. First up, storytelling. We're not talking about bedtime tales read from a Kindle. These were epic sagas recited by skalds, the poets of the Viking world. Imagine a cross between a bard and a stand-up comedian, weaving stories that were part history, part legend, and all riveting. Skalds were the keepers of law, and their performances could make or break an evening around the hearth. They recounted tales of gods and heroes, like Odin and Thor, names that might sound familiar thanks to a certain comic book franchise. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is a far cry from what the Norse actually believed. Now, before you start picturing Thor in a horned helmet, let's debunk that little myth. Vikings never wore helmets adorned with horns. That's a Wagnerian fantasy, a 19th century invention that somehow stuck around like a stubborn piece of gum on a shoe. Real Viking helmets were practical affairs, made of iron and designed for protection, not theatrics. They were more about surviving a battle than making a fashion statement. Speaking of Odin and his divine entourage, the Norse pantheon was a colorful cast of characters. Odin, the one-eyed god of wisdom and war, was a central figure, revered not just for his might, but for his cunning. Then there's Thor, the thunder god with a penchant for hammer swinging, who was more relatable to the common Viking, a protector of farmers and warriors alike. Freyja, the goddess of love and fertility, was another favorite, her influence extending to matters of both the heart and the harvest. These gods weren't just celestial beings lounging in some Valhalla penthouse. They were integral to daily life, invoked for everything from successful harvests to safe voyages. The line between mortal and divine was as blurry as a foggy morning in the fjords. Rituals and sacrifices were common, though not the blood-soaked orgies of violence often depicted in popular media. Sure, animals were offered to curry favor with the gods, but the practice was more solemn than savage. And what about games? Vikings loved a good challenge, and games like H-Nefertafel, think of it as Viking chess, were popular pastimes. This wasn't a casual afternoon of checkers. H-Nefertafel was a strategic battle of wits. The game involved two unequal sides, reflecting the eternal struggle between attackers and defenders, much like the real-life skirmishes Vikings were accustomed to. It was a game that sharpened the mind, a cerebral preparation for the tactical demands of both raiding and trading. Then there was music. The soundscape of a Viking longhouse might not have included a top 40 playlist, but it was alive with melodies played on lyres and harps. Music was a communal affair, a way to celebrate victories and soothe sorrows, binding the community together in a shared rhythm. It was the Spotify of its time, minus the annoying ads. But why did these cultural elements matter so much? Well, in a world where survival was a daily challenge, leisure and culture were crucial. They provided a mental escape, a way to blow off steam and reinforce social bonds. Storytelling and games strengthened community ties, while music and mythology offered solace and inspiration. In essence, they were the original self-help tools, a toolkit for navigating the choppy waters of Viking existence. And let's not forget the sagas themselves, those epic tales of adventure and intrigue. They weren't just for entertainment, they were a means of preserving history and values. Through these stories, lessons were passed down, teaching future generations the virtues of bravery, loyalty, and cunning. The sagas were both a mirror and a map, reflecting the society that created them and guiding those who came after. Now, if you're wondering how all this fits into the broader Viking strategy for survival, it's simple. Culture and leisure were as strategic as swordplay and seamanship. They fortified the spirit, fostering resilience in the face of adversity. In a world where the next meal or battle was never guaranteed, these cultural practices were a lifeline, a way to endure and thrive. So, as you absorb the vibrant tapestry of Viking leisure and culture, remember that these elements were more than mere diversions. They were the heartbeat of a society that balanced the harsh realities of life with the sweetness of song and story. The next time you find yourself engrossed in a good book or tapping your foot to a catchy tune, consider the Vikings, who understood that even the fiercest warriors needed a little rah. But don't settle in too comfortably. The Viking saga is still unfolding. There's more adventure ahead as we delve deeper into the world of the Norse, where every tale, tune, and game was part of a grander narrative that shaped history itself. Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. As the shadows stretch long across the Viking village, you find yourself drawn back into the embrace of the Longhouse, where the flickering hearth casts a warm, inviting glow. The day's labours have given way to evening rituals, and soon the Longhouse will transform into the epicenter of community life. Again, but with a vibe shift from the frenetic daytime hustle to a more relaxed and convivial atmosphere. It's time for the evening meal, a cornerstone of Viking social life, where bonds are forged as surely as the iron tools that built this world. The meal itself is far from the lavish feasts of Hollywood imagination. We're not talking about endless platters of roasted meats and overflowing goblets of mead. Viking fare was practical, a reflection of both the environment and the economy. Picture a hearty stew bubbling away over the central hearth, a blend of whatever's in season, root vegetables, grains like barley or oats, and perhaps some salted fish or meat if the gods were smiling. The communal pot is a cauldron of sustenance, where everyone dips in for their share, reinforcing the sense of unity and shared fate. Now, let's add some spice to the stew by diving into the significance of these gatherings. In the harsh Nordic environment, community wasn't just a nicety, it was a necessity. The Longhouse was more than a roof over one's head. It was a lifeline, offering warmth, protection, and a space where the community could gather, support each other, and weather both literal and metaphorical storms. In a land where winter nights stretch on like an epic saga, the Longhouse was a beacon, a sanctuary where the cold couldn't reach your bones, or at least tried its best not to. But don't be fooled into thinking these meals were all about the food. They were social glue, an opportunity to share stories, news, and laughter. Picture it as the original social media platform, minus the trolls, unless you count that one uncle with a penchant for tall tales. This is where skalds would earn their keep, spinning sagas and reciting poetry, while the rest listened, entranced, their imaginations fired by tales of gods, heroes, and distant lands. It was a time for merriment, but also for cementing alliances and strengthening family ties. And speaking of ties, let's not overlook the economic undercurrents here. Feasting wasn't just a social commitment. It was also a display of wealth and status. The ability to host a grand feast, yes, even a modest stew-centric one, was a sign of prosperity and influence. It was a chance for chieftains to showcase their resources, remind everyone of their standing, and sometimes even recruit new allies or retainers. In Viking society, where reputation was as valuable as gold, these gatherings were an investment in social capital. Now, as you sit there, perhaps with a wooden bowl balanced on your knee, consider the myth versus the reality of Viking feasting. The image of wild, raucous banquets with ale flowing like rivers is intoxicating, sure, but reality was a tad more subdued. There was laughter and camaraderie, absolutely, but within the bounds of a tightly knit community where everyone had a role to play. The Longhouse, after all, was not just a feasting hall but a family home, and the line between revelry and responsibility was a careful one to tread. In this dimly lit hall, you're reminded of the balance that defined Viking life, the push and pull between myth and reality. Yes, the myths are seductive, with their tales of fearless warriors and grand adventures. But the true Viking saga was written in the everyday struggles and triumphs of ordinary people. in the strength found in community and the resilience to endure whatever life could throw at them. It's a story that resonates even today, echoing through the ages like a skald's song, reminding us of the power of human connection and the simple joys of a shared meal. As the evening unfolds and the firelight flickers against the thatched roof, you might find yourself contemplating how these ancient practices still find their way into our modern lives. We may not gather in longhouses, but the spirit of community, of coming together to share stories and sustenance, remains a potent force. It's there in family dinners, in neighborhood barbecues, in the simple act of breaking bread with friends. The Vikings understood that life's battles are not fought alone, and that true strength lies in the bonds we forge with others. So, as the night deepens and the longhouse settles into a cozy hum of conversation and contentment, take a moment to appreciate the legacy of these ancient Norsemen. They were warriors and farmers, traders and poets, and their story is as much about resilience and adaptability as it is about conquest and exploration. The Viking world was a tapestry of contradictions, fierce yet communal, pragmatic yet mythic, and always striving for balance in a landscape that demanded nothing less. And as you drift off, perhaps lulled by the rhythmic rise and fall of a skald's voice, remember that the Vikings lived by a code that resonates even now. Their world was one of challenges and opportunities, where the harshness of life was softened by the warmth of community. They remind us that while we may not face the same elements or struggles, the essence of their story, of humanity's capacity for creativity, cooperation, and perseverance, is timeless. Stay curious, my friend, for history is not just a record of what was, but a lens through which we can understand what is and what might be. The Viking saga is just one chapter in the grand epic of human endeavor, a chapter that continues to inform and inspire, long after the last mead horn has been drained and the stories of old have been spun. Sleep well, knowing you've shared in a journey through time, where even the simplest meal could spark the grandest of tales.